Welcome back, fire starters. You made it. You survived part 1. You watched Seraphina Ashwood get torn apart by rejection, hunted by her own pack, and marked by a prophecy that could either save or destroy the wolf world. You stood with her as she met Matthias Kyle, the Alpha King who spent 2 centuries alone, and witnessed her first awakening at the ancient shrine. You held your breath when 70 hostile wolves surrounded her, demanding her death, and you felt the moment she shifted despite her wounds and proved she wouldn't be broken. Now she has 3 days until council, 3 days until 7 alpha packs vote on whether she lives or dies, 3 days to master power that's lived dormant for generations. The training begins now. The real test is coming, and nothing will ever be the same. But wait, if you just stumbled onto part 2 and you're thinking, what the hell is happening? Here's what you need to know in 3 seconds. Rejected wolf discovers she's prophesied child of the flame, gets rescued by immortal Alpha King, awakens world-shaking power at Forbidden Shrine, now faces execution by council in 3 days, unless she can prove she won't burn everything to ash. Enemies want her dead. Destiny says she's salvation. And the Alpha King, he's willing to start a war to keep her alive. Got it? Good. Now go back and watch part 1. Link in the description, because the context will make part 2 hit 10 times harder. For everyone else who's been waiting, who subscribed, who shared, who knew this story was going to consume them, thank you. Your support fuels this fire. And I promise, part 2 will deliver everything you've been craving and more. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Hit that button, because this story is a wildfire, and you don't want to miss a single spark. Now then, let's see what happens when a woman marked by prophecy stops apologizing for the power in her veins. Part 2 begins now. Chapter 6. Deepening connection. Trust me or leave. The first night after the confrontation, Sarah couldn't sleep. Her body was exhausted. The shift had taken everything she had, reopened wounds that were barely healed, left her shaking and hollow. Matthias had carried her back to the settlement, tended her injuries with hands that were surprisingly gentle for someone who looked like he was carved from violence, and ordered her to rest. She'd tried. Laid on the furs in the small room he'd given her, private, warm, safe, and closed her eyes. But every time she drifted towards sleep, she saw them. 70 pairs of eyes staring at her with fear and hatred. 7 alphas calculating how best to end her. The future rushing toward her like an avalanche she couldn't outrun. 3 days. The thoughts circled her mind like a vulture. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep entirely, wrapped herself in a heavy cloak, and slipped out of the settlement, moving quietly through the darkness. The boundary wards hummed their recognition as she passed. Matthias had keyed them to allow her passage, though she suspected he'd know the moment she crossed. She didn't care. She needed air, needed space, needed to feel something other than the crushing weight of destiny and judgment pressing down on her shoulders. Her feet carried her without conscious direction, following paths that felt older than the trees around them. The forest was alive with night sounds, wind through branches, small creatures moving through underbrush, the distant call of an owl, and underneath it all, that persistent hum, the song of power that lived in the earth here, in the stones, in the very air itself. She walked for maybe an hour before she realized where she was going. The shrine. The clearing appeared through the trees like it had been waiting for her. The 7 pillars stood silent and dark, no longer glowing, but she could feel them, could feel their awareness, their acknowledgement of her presence. She stepped onto the worked stone, and the humming intensified. Not painful, almost welcoming. Like coming home to a place she'd never been, but somehow always known. I thought I might find you here, she spun, hand already raised with silver fire dancing across her fingers. Pure instinct, pure defense, before her mind caught up and recognized the voice. Matthias stood at the tree line, backlit by moonlight, his expression unreadable. She let the fire die. You followed me. The wards told me you left. I wanted to make sure you were safe. He moved into the clearing with that same predatory grace, his eyes never leaving hers. Though I should have known you'd come here. Why here? Because this is where it started, where you were recognized, where you stopped running from what you are. He stopped a few feet away, maintaining distance. It makes sense you'd seek it out when you're afraid. I'm not afraid. Liar. But there was no judgment in the word, just observation. She looked away, focusing on the nearest pillar. Fine. I'm terrified. Happy? No. He moved closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. I'm rarely happy when you're in pain. The casual admission made her throat tight. I keep seeing them, she said quietly. All those wolves, all that hatred. And in 3 days I have to stand in front of them again and convince them I deserve to live. How am I supposed to do that? By being exactly who you are. That's what got me condemned in the first place. No. His hand came up, tilting her chin until she had to meet his eyes. Fear got you condemned. Ignorance. The comfortable lie that power should look a certain way, behave a certain way, exist within certain acceptable boundaries. His thumb stroked along her jaw. You shattered those boundaries just by existing. That's not your failure. That's theirs. She wanted to believe him, wanted to accept that simple truth, and let it ease the knot of anxiety in her chest. But it wasn't that simple. What if they're right? The question slipped out before she could stop it. What if I am too dangerous? What if this power inside me is meant to destroy, and I'm just too naive to see it? Then I'm naive too. He released her chin but didn't step back. Because I look at you and I don't see destruction. I see potential, evolution, the thing wolfkind needs even if they're too afraid to accept it. You barely know me. I know enough. His expression shifted, something vulnerable breaking through the alpha mask. I know you held back during your rejection ceremony, even though unleashing your power would have saved you. I know you chose to jump off a cliff rather than submit to execution. I know you stood before 70 hostile wolves yesterday and proved your control despite being terrified. He paused. And I know that in 243 years, I have never met anyone who makes me feel less alone. The confession hit her like a physical blow. Matthias, let me finish. He took a breath, and she realized he was nervous. Actually nervous. This immortal Alpha King who'd ruled through blood and isolation was nervous about what he was going to say. I told you I've been watching you for 2 months. What I didn't tell you is why I kept watching even after I understood what you were. She waited, not trusting her voice. 160 years ago, I made a decision. His eyes went distant, looking at something she couldn't see. There was a young wolf in one of my territories, powerful, unstable. The pack wanted him executed, said he was too dangerous, too volatile, that his power was corrupting their bloodlines. Sarah's stomach dropped. She knew where this was going. I agreed with them, Matthias continued, his voice flat. I looked at this boy. He was barely 20, and I saw a threat. So I did what Alpha Kings do. I eliminated the threat before it could grow. You killed him. I executed him in front of his pack, made an example of him, proved that I wouldn't tolerate instability, that power without control was unacceptable. His jaw clenched. And then 3 months later, I found his journals. Found out he'd been trying to learn control. Had been begging the elders for help, for training, for time to understand what was happening to him. They'd refused. Told him he was corrupted. told him he was beyond saving. Oh God. His name was Ethan. Matthias's voice cracked on the name. He was an artist, drew these incredible sketches of the forest, of wolves in motion, of the way moonlight looked on snow. He wanted to be a teacher, wanted to help young wolves learn to track and hunt, and I killed him because I was too afraid of what his power might become to see who he actually was. Tears burned in Sarah's eyes, not for herself, for a boy who died a century and a half ago, because fear had been stronger than mercy. When I felt your power awaken 2 months ago, when I realized what you were, my first instinct was the same. Matthias finally met her eyes again. Eliminate the threat. Protect the territories. Do what I've always done. But you didn't. No. Because I couldn't stop thinking about Ethan, about the journals, about the fact that I'd killed a boy who might have become something incredible if I'd just given him time. His hands came up to frame her face, and they were shaking. I couldn't make that mistake again. I couldn't be the reason another young wolf with impossible power died before discovering what they could become. So you watched me. So I watched you. And what I saw? He leaned his forehead against hers. You're nothing like him. You're stronger, more controlled, more willing to choose mercy even when it costs you. But the situation is the same. A young wolf with power that terrifies everyone around her, being condemned for existing. And this time you chose differently. This time I chose you. The words were fierce, absolute. I chose to protect instead of destroy, to trust instead of fear. And I will not apologize for that choice, even if it costs me everything. She couldn't breathe around the emotion clogging her throat. I'm not worth starting a war over. That's not your decision to make. His thumbs wiped away tears she hadn't realized were falling. I've started wars for territory, for resources, for political advantage. Why not start one for someone who makes me remember what it feels like to hope? Hope for what? That maybe I'm not defined by my worst decision? That maybe redemption is possible even after a century and a half? That maybe. He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. That maybe I don't have to be alone anymore. The vulnerability in his voice broke something open inside her chest. You're not alone, she whispered. Not anymore. Neither are you. The space between them felt charged, electric. She was acutely aware of every point of contact, his hands on her face, the warmth of his breath, the solid presence of his body so close to hers. She should step back, should maintain distance, should remember that she'd known this man for less than a week, and getting emotionally entangled with him was probably the worst possible idea. Instead, she leaned in, his breath caught, his pupils dilated. Sarah. Her name was a warning, a question, a plea. I know it's insane, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know we barely know each other. I know the timing is terrible, and the situation is impossible. And there are approximately 1,000 reasons this is a bad idea. All true. But I also know that when I'm with you, the fear gets quieter. The weight gets lighter. The future feels less like a death sentence and more like something I might actually survive. She swallowed hard. You make me feel less alone, too. Something in his expression cracked. The alpha mask fell away completely, leaving behind something raw and real and utterly unguarded. If we do this, he stopped, started again. If we cross this line, there's no going back. The council will use it against you. Will say I'm compromised, that I'm thinking with that I'm not being objective. It'll make everything harder. I don't care. You should. Well, I don't. She lifted her chin, meeting his eyes with absolute certainty. I've spent my entire life being small, being acceptable, following rules and traditions and expectations. And where did it get me? Rejected, hunted, condemned. The silver fire beneath her skin pulsed in response to her emotion. I'm done being small, Matthias. I'm done apologizing for what I feel. If the council wants to condemn me for choosing you, let them add it to the list. His control was hanging by a thread. She could see it in the tension of his jaw, the white-knuckled grip of his hands on her face, the way his breathing had gone shallow and quick. You don't know what you're asking for. Then show me. The thread snapped. He kissed her like a man dying of thirst, finally finding water. Like 2 centuries of isolation and loneliness had built up behind a dam, and she was the crack that made it all come flooding through. His mouth was hot and demanding, his lips moving against hers with an intensity that stole her breath. One hand slid into her hair, angling her head, deepening the kiss. The other dropped to her waist, pulling her flush against his body. She gasped at the contact, the solid heat of him, the raw power contained in that frame, the way he held her like she was both precious and fierce. Her hands came up to grip his shoulders, then slid higher, tangling in his hair. The silver streaks felt like silk against her fingers. The kiss went from intense to consuming. She could taste his desperation, his need, the 200 years he'd spent alone wrapping around her like a physical force. And underneath it all, something else. Recognition. Like their souls had been searching and had finally found what they'd been looking for. When they finally broke apart, lungs screaming for air, hearts pounding, they stayed close, foreheads pressed together, breathing each other's air. That was... She couldn't finish the sentence. Didn't have words for what that had been. Inevitable, he finished for her. From the moment you collapsed on my doorstep. Maybe before that. His hand stroked down her spine, gentle despite the hunger still burning in his eyes. I've been fighting this since I first felt your power awaken. Why fight it? Because you deserve better than a king with blood on his hands and ghosts in his past. Because this complicates everything. Because... He cupped her face again, his expression fierce. Because I terrify myself with how far I'd go to keep you safe. Good. The word came out stronger than she expected. Because I terrify myself with how much I trust you despite barely knowing you. Trust is earned, not given. Then earn it. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes properly. Show me who you really are. Not the Alpha King, not the ruler who's maintained peace for 2 centuries. You, the man who carries Ethan's memory like a wound, the one who's been alone so long he forgot what hope feels like. Something in his expression shifted, softened. You want truth? All of it. He was quiet for a long moment, his hands still on her, his eyes searching her face like he was trying to memorize every detail. I'm not a good man, Sarah. I don't need good. I need real. I've killed more wolves than I can count. Some who deserved it, some who probably didn't. I've made decisions that haunted me for decades. I've ruled through fear and force and the willingness to do things others won't. And I'm tired. The confession was raw. I'm so fucking tired of being the monster everyone needs me to be. Of making impossible choices, of living in isolation because getting close to anyone means making myself vulnerable. His grip on her tightened. But then you showed up, bleeding and defiant and absolutely refusing to break. And something in me recognized something in you. What did it recognize? A kindred spirit. Someone else who survived what should have destroyed them. Someone else who carries power they didn't ask for and doesn't know what to do with it. He paused. Someone worth fighting for. Worth changing for. I don't want you to change. No, A wry smile touched his mouth. Even the parts that are scarred and brutal and compromised by 2 centuries of blood? Especially those parts. She reached up, tracing one of the scars on his face. Because they're proof you survived, proof you endured, proof that even monsters can choose mercy when it matters. He caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm. You see me too clearly. Good, because you do the same to me. She turned her hand, lacing their fingers together. When you look at me, what do you see? You want the truth? Always. He was quiet for a moment, his amber eyes roving over her face. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I see someone who should have been broken 12 times over but refused to stay down. I see power that could reshape the world wrapped in compassion that prevents it from becoming destruction. I see a woman who chose to protect her enemy at the cost of her own safety. I see... He stopped, swallowed hard. I see the future I didn't know I wanted until you crashed into my life. That's a lot to put on someone you've known less than a week. I know, I'm sorry. Don't apologize. She squeezed his hand. I see it too. The future. The possibility. The thing we could become if we both survive the next 3 days. We'll survive. You don't know that. Yes, I do. The certainty in his voice was absolute. Because I won't let it end any other way. Because you're too strong to be killed by frightened alphas. Because the prophecy says you have a choice, and I'll make damn sure you live long enough to make it. She wanted to believe him, wanted to sink into that certainty and let it carry her through the fear. But she'd learned the hard way that wanting something didn't make it true. Show me something, she said instead. What? Your true form, your full power. She pulled back enough to gesture at him. You've seen me shift, seen me lose control, seen me at my most vulnerable. Show me what the King of Ash really looks like when he stops holding back. He tensed. Sarah, please, I need to know what I'm choosing, who I'm trusting. She held his gaze. Show me the monster you think you are. Let me decide if I'm still willing to stand beside you. For a moment, she thought he'd refuse, thought the vulnerability she was asking for was a bridge too far. Then he stepped back, putting distance between them. Don't be afraid, he said quietly. I'm not. You should be. And then he shifted. But it wasn't like any shift she'd ever seen. His form didn't just change, it expanded. Bones cracking and reforming, muscles rippling and growing, until what stood before her was less wolf and more elemental force. He was massive, easily twice the size of any alpha she'd encountered, with fur so dark it seemed to absorb light. Silver streaked through his coat like lightning frozen in time. His eyes glowed pure amber, bright enough to cast shadows. And around him, like heat shimmer off summer pavement, power radiated invisible waves, not silver like hers. This was darker, older, the kind of power that had been forged in blood and loss, and the absolute refusal to break. The King of Ash. She understood the title now, understood what he'd survived to become this, understood why 7 packs bowed to his authority. He was terrifying, and he was magnificent. She stepped forward, one step, then another, until she stood directly in front of him. His head was level with her chest, even on all fours. One swipe of those claws could disembowel her. One snap of those jaws could break her neck. She reached out slowly and placed her palm against his muzzle. The amber eyes widened. Surprise, maybe disbelief that she wasn't running. I see you, she whispered. The words felt important, sacred. Not the weapon you've made yourself into. Not the king who rules through fear. Not the monster you think you are. She stroked along his jaw, feeling the raw power vibrating beneath his fur. You. The man who's been alone for 2 centuries and forgot what it feels like to be seen as anything other than useful or terrifying. He made a sound, somewhere between a growl and a whimper, utterly inhuman but somehow heartbreaking in its vulnerability. "You're not a monster, Matthias." She pressed her forehead against his. "You're just someone who survived impossible things and paid the price for it. Same as me." The shift back to human form was faster, smoother, like her acceptance had given him permission to be vulnerable. When he stood before her again on 2 legs, naked, scarred, absolutely beautiful in his brutal honesty, there were tears on his face. "No one's ever—" His voice cracked. 200 years, and no one's ever looked at me like that. Like I'm anything other than a weapon or a threat or a tool to be used. Then everyone else is blind." She closed the distance between them, wrapping her arms around him despite his nudity, despite the impropriety, despite everything. "I see you, Matthias Kyle, and I choose you. Monster king, broken man trying to find redemption, I choose all of it." His arms came around her, crushing her against his chest. She felt his shoulders shake, felt wetness against her hair, realized this immortal Alpha King was crying. "I don't deserve you," he said against her hair. "Probably not." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "But you're stuck with me anyway." He laughed, wet and broken, and more real than anything she'd heard from him. 3 days, he said again, but this time it didn't sound like a death sentence. "We have 3 days to prepare you, to make sure when you stand before that council, they see what I see." And what's that? Power they can't afford to destroy, strength they need even if they're too afraid to admit it. His hands came up to frame her face. The future of wolf kind, whether they like it or not. No pressure then. None at all. His smile was wry. "Can you do one thing for me?" "What?" "Stop trying to protect me." His thumbs stroked her cheekbones. "Stop worrying about my authority or my position or what the council will think. Those are my problems to manage. Your only job is to survive and become everything you're meant to be." "That's 2 things." "Fine. 3 things." His expression turned fierce. "Let me protect you. Let me teach you. And let me—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "Let me care about you without apologizing for it." The permission in those words, the acknowledgement that this thing between them was real and worth protecting, made her throat tight. Okay, I'll try. I'll probably fail because I'm stubborn and independent and terrible at letting people help me, but I'll try. That's all I'm asking." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, gentle, reverent. "Now come, we should get back before my pack starts worrying." "They know you followed me?" "Probably. I'm not exactly subtle." He released her and moved to where he'd apparently left clothes before shifting. "They also probably know what just happened between us." "How?" "Wolves have excellent noses." He pulled on pants with economical movements. "And emotional bonds have sense. We basically just announced to anyone sensitive enough to notice that we've claimed each other." Heat flooded her cheeks. "Claimed?" "Not officially, not binding." He pulled his shirt over his head. "But enough that anyone paying attention will know we're involved." "Is that going to be a problem?" "For the council, probably." He crossed back to her, taking her hand. "For me? Never." They walked back through the forest in comfortable silence, hands linked, shoulders occasionally bumping. The night felt different now, less frightening, like the darkness held possibilities instead of just threats. When they reached the settlement and the small building where Sarah had been staying, Matthias stopped. "Get some rest, real rest this time." He squeezed her hand. "Tomorrow we start training in earnest. I'm going to push you harder than you've ever been pushed." "I can take it." I know you can. He leaned down, pressing one more kiss to her forehead. That's why I'm not holding back. He turned to leave, but she stopped him with a hand on his arm. Matthias? Hmm? Thank you. For telling me about Ethan, for showing me your true form, for... She gestured helplessly. For everything. His smile was soft, real. Thank you for seeing me, the real me, and not running. I told you, I'm done running. Good. His expression turned serious. Because what's coming won't allow for retreat. Only forward, only through. Then we go through together. Together. He agreed. And as she watched him disappear into the night, Sarah felt something settle in her chest. Not peace. The situation was too volatile for peace, but certainty. Whatever happened in 3 days, whatever judgment the council passed, whatever trials lay ahead, she wouldn't face them alone. She had an Alpha King willing to burn the world to protect her. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. Inside her small room, wrapped in furs that smelled like pine and smoke and Matthias, Sarah finally drifted toward sleep. And for the first time since Silverfire had destroyed her old life, her dreams weren't nightmares. They were promises of power mastered, of futures claimed, of a woman and a king standing side by side against a world determined to tear them apart. Let them try. The fire was just beginning to burn. And this time, she wouldn't be the only one wielding it. Chapter 7. The Grand Betrayal. The Mask Drops. The 2 days that followed were a baptism by fire. Matthias hadn't been exaggerating when he said he wouldn't hold back. He drove Sarah harder than she'd ever been pushed, forcing her to shift repeatedly until her bones screamed, making her hold the silver fire for hours until her hands shook with exhaustion, sparring with her in human form until she was bruised and bloodied and barely standing. And through it all, he was patient, demanding but never cruel, pushing her to her limits and then slightly beyond, finding the exact edge where growth happened without breaking. By the morning of the 3rd day, Sarah could summon her fire at will, could shift without losing control, could maintain human thought in wolf form for extended periods, could even combine the two, letting silver flames dance across her fur without burning herself or losing the shift. It wasn't mastery, but it was control, real, demonstrable control. It would have to be enough. They left for the old meeting ground 2 hours before dawn, traveling through darkness with a small contingent of Matthias's wolves. The meeting ground was neutral territory, a massive clearing ringed by ancient stones, located at the convergence of 7 territorial boundaries, sacred ground, where the oldest accords had been signed, where interpact disputes had been settled for centuries, where Sarah would stand trial for the crime of existing. The clearing was already filled when they arrived. Hundreds of wolves, easily 400 or 500, maybe more, packed into the space. The 7 packs had brought witnesses, warriors, elders, some in human form, others shifted, all of them watching as Matthias's group entered the clearing. The hostility was a physical force. Sarah could feel it pressing against her skin like humidity before a storm. The 7 alphas stood on a raised platform at the far end of the clearing. Natural stone that formed a rough dais, Thera, Borin, Cade, and the 4 others whose names Sarah had learned during preparation. Lyra, the white-haired woman, Soren, the nervous young alpha, and the twins, Kale and Mara. 7 alphas, 7 votes, 7 wolves who would decide her fate. Matthias stopped at the base of the platform, his hand finding Sarah's, grounding her, reminding her she wasn't alone. Seraphina Ashwood, Thera's voice rang out across the clearing. You stand before the 7-pack council accused of being a threat to pack stability, territorial security, and the natural order of wolfkind. How do you answer these charges? Sarah lifted her chin. I answer that I've done nothing wrong, that I didn't choose this power, and that being born different isn't a crime. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, not all hostile, some uncertain, questioning. You claim innocence. Bourne stepped forward, his massive frame casting shadows in the pre-dawn light. But your very presence destabilizes the old magic. Young wolves across 7 territories are manifesting powers they shouldn't have. Elders are having visions. The boundary wards are flickering. That's not my fault, isn't it? Lyra's copper eyes were hard. Your awakening sent shockwaves through every sensitive wolf within 200 miles. You're a beacon, a catalyst. Whether you intended it or not, you're changing things. Change isn't the same as destruction. In our world, it often is. This from Soren, his nervousness making him speak too quickly. You're untested, unbound to any pack, answering to no authority but your own desires. That makes you dangerous. I answer to the same laws as everyone else. Do you? Cade's voice was sharp, because the prophecy says otherwise, says you'll break councils, end stagnant rule, bow to no king. That sounds like someone who considers herself above our laws. The prophecy isn't my manifesto. It's words carved in stone by wolves who died thousands of years ago. It doesn't define who I am or what I'll choose. But it defines what you could become. Thera leaned forward. And that's what we're judging today. Not who you are now, but who you might become if we let you live. The trap was so elegant, Sarah almost admired it. They weren't condemning her for actions taken, but for potential futures. Impossible to defend against because she couldn't prove what she wouldn't do. Then you're not holding a trial. Matthias's voice cut through the growing tension. You're holding an execution with extra steps because there's no evidence she can present that will satisfy you. Stay out of this, Matthias. Thera's tone was warning. You've already compromised yourself by taking her in. Don't make it worse. Compromised myself? His laugh was bitter. By showing mercy to a young wolf who'd been cast out and hunted? By choosing to see potential instead of just threat? If that's compromise, I'll wear it proudly. You're thinking with your... Cade started, but Thera cut him off with a sharp gesture. Careful, we agreed to keep this civil. Civil? Matthias's voice dropped into dangerous registers. There's nothing civil about condemning someone without evidence of wrongdoing. We have evidence. Boren gestured to someone in the crowd. Bring the witness. Sarah's stomach dropped as a figure emerged from the mass of assembled wolves. She recognized him immediately. Dax, the warrior from her old pack, the one she thought might be her mate, the one who'd stood silent during her rejection ceremony. He wouldn't meet her eyes as he climbed onto the platform. State your name and pack affiliation, Thera commanded. Dax Thorne, Ashwood Pack, senior warrior. His voice was steady, but she could hear the tremor underneath. And what testimony do you bring before this council? Dax finally looked at her, and the guilt in his expression made her chest tight. I was present at Seraphina's rejection ceremony. I witnessed the manifestation of her power. He swallowed hard. What the council doesn't know is that it wasn't the first time. Ice flooded Sarah's veins. Explain, Thera ordered. 3 months before the ceremony, Sarah and I were training together, sparring. She landed a hit that should have been impossible, moved faster than any wolf should move, hit harder than someone her size could hit. And for just a second, I saw her hands glow. Silver light, just a flash. Then it was gone. And you didn't report this? Bourne's voice was incredulous. I thought I'd imagined it. Thought it was sunlight reflecting off sweat. Dax's jaw clenched. But after the ceremony, after seeing what she became, I realized what I'd witnessed. She's been manifesting this power for months. Hiding it. Lying about it. That's not true. Sarah's protest came out too loud, too desperate. I didn't know what it was. I thought I didn't understand. So you admit you were manifesting before the ceremony? Cade pounced on the admission. That you hid this from your pack? Your elders? I didn't hide anything. I didn't know there was anything to hide. But the damage was done. She could see it in the alphas' faces, the hardening, the confirmation of suspicions. Is there more? Thera asked Dax. He hesitated, and Sarah felt her world tilting. Tell them, a voice called from the crowd. Elder Karn stepped forward, his expression grim. Tell them what you told me. Dax's hands clenched into fists. 2 weeks before the ceremony, Sarah came to me, asked me about bloodline corruption, about what happens when power manifests that shouldn't exist. She was scared, said she was feeling things she didn't understand. And what did you tell her? Lyra's voice was dangerously soft. I told her to speak to the elders, to get help before whatever was happening got worse. His voice broke. She said she would, but she never did. She kept it hidden until the ceremony forced it out. Sarah's vision was swimming. I was afraid. I didn't know what was happening to me, and I was terrified the pack would reject me if they knew. So you hid it. Thera's voice was triumphant. You knew something was wrong. You had opportunities to seek help, to be honest with your pack, and you chose deception instead. I chose survival! The words ripped out of her. I chose to try to understand what was happening before I was condemned for it. And I was right to be afraid because the moment it showed, you all wanted me dead. Because you're dangerous. Cade slammed his hand on the stone platform. You just admitted you've been manifesting uncontrolled power for months. Power you don't understand. Power you can't fully control. How are we supposed to trust that? You're not. Matthias's voice cut through the chaos. Because you came here with your minds already made up. This isn't a trial. It's theater designed to justify a decision you made before we ever arrived. That's not, Thera started. Spare me. Matthias moved to stand beside Sarah, his presence solid and protective. You want to execute her because she scares you, because she represents change you're not ready for, because admitting she might be exactly what the prophecy says, salvation instead of destruction, would require you to question everything you think you know about power and control. And you. Born's voice was heavy with disappointment. What happened to the King of Ash who understood that sometimes mercy is the cruelest choice? Who knew that eliminating threats before they grow is the only way to maintain peace? The reference to Ethan landed like a blow. Sarah felt Matthias tense beside her. I learned from my mistakes, Matthias said quietly. I learned that fear makes us kill things we should protect, that the need for control makes us destroy what we don't understand, that sometimes the threat we eliminate is actually the salvation we needed. His hand found Sarah's. I will not make that mistake again. Then you've chosen her over your duty. Thera's voice was sad, almost regretful. Over 2 centuries of service, over the peace you've maintained. I've chosen mercy over murder. That's not abandoning duty. That's remembering what duty is supposed to serve. The 7 alphas exchanged glances. Some kind of silent communication passing between them. Very well. Thera straightened. The council has heard testimony, heard defense. We will now vote on whether Seraphina Ashwood represents an acceptable risk to pack territories or whether she must be eliminated for the greater good. You can't be serious. Matthias started. All in favor of execution? Thera raised her hand. Boren's hand went up, then Cade's. Soren hesitated, then raised his as well. 4 hands. They needed 4 votes to pass sentence. Sarah stopped breathing. The twins looked at each other. Mara shook her head slightly. Kale's jaw clenched. Neither raised their hands. 3 votes. They were 1 vote short. Hope flickered in Sarah's chest. Lyra stood absolutely still, her copper eyes locked on Sarah, weighing, judging. Then slowly, she raised her hand. 4 votes. The clearing erupted. Matthias's wolves surged forward, growling, forming a protective barrier around Sarah. The assembled packs responded, warriors moving into position, the whole clearing teetering on the edge of violence. "Stand down!" Thera's voice cut through the chaos. "The council has voted. The sentence will be carried out." "Like hell it will." Matthias's power exploded outward. Not a shift, just raw dominance that made every wolf in the clearing cringe. "You want her dead, you go through me first." "Matthias, don't." Sarah grabbed his arm, but he shook her off. "I declare Seraphina Ashwood under my formal protection. Any wolf who touches her answers to me personally. Any pack that pursues her becomes my enemy. Any alpha who continues this farce forfeits any claim to my authority or protection." His voice carried across the clearing like thunder. "Choose carefully." The 7 alphas stared at him with expressions ranging from shock to fury to something like grief. "You would start a war?" Bourne's voice was incredulous. "Over one wolf? After everything you've built?" "Yes." The answer was simple, absolute. "I would burn every alliance, sever every tie, destroy every bridge I've built if that's what it takes to keep her alive." "Then you're no longer fit to lead." Thera's voice was cold. "The King of Ash is meant to serve all packs, not personal interest. By declaring her under protection against council vote, you've violated the very laws you swore to uphold." "Then I'm a hypocrite and a lawbreaker." Matthias didn't sound bothered. "I can live with that. Can you live with the consequences of pushing this?" The tension was a physical thing. Wolves on both sides were shifting. Partial transformations, claws extending, eyes glowing. The clearing had become a powder keg waiting for a spark. "There's another option." A new voice cut through the standoff. A figure stepped onto the platform. Tall, hooded, moving with a grace that spoke of age and power. Sarah's breath caught as the figure lowered their hood. It was her mother. "Mom?" The word came out broken, confused. Her mother, Elena Ashwood, looked older than Sarah remembered. More worn, but her eyes were the same, sharp, calculating, and utterly devoid of warmth as they landed on her daughter. "I invoke blood right," Elena said formally. "As Seraphina's mother, I have the authority to speak on matters of her bloodline and character." "Mom, what are you doing?" Sarah couldn't process this. Her mother was here. Her mother who turned away during the rejection ceremony, who'd chosen pack over daughter. Elena didn't answer her, addressed the alphas instead. "The council is asking the wrong questions. You want to know if she's a threat, if she can be controlled, if the prophecy will come to pass." Her voice was steady, practiced. "But what you should be asking is where this power came from. What bloodline could produce the child of the flame?" Ice spread through Sarah's chest. "And you know the answer to that?" Thera leaned forward. "I do." Elena's smile was terrible. "Because I ensured it would manifest. 24 years ago, I made a choice. I sought out a wolf with ancient bloodlines. Bloodlines that carried the old magic, the silver fire. And I conceived a child specifically designed to fulfill the prophecy." The clearing went absolutely silent. Sarah felt like the ground had opened beneath her feet. "You're saying you planned this?" Lyra's voice was sharp. "That you deliberately created a child to become what she is?" "Yes." Elena's eyes finally found Sarah's. "Your father doesn't know. I told him you were his. Made him believe our mating produced you naturally. But the truth is, Seraphina, you're the product of careful breeding. An experiment to see if the old bloodlines could be rekindled." "You're lying." Sarah's voice shook. "You're lying. This isn't." "I spent 5 years researching bloodlines, finding a wolf who carried the markers, arranging the conception, and then 23 years watching, waiting, hoping the power would manifest. Elena's expression was clinical. When you started showing signs, I was thrilled. When you hid them, I was disappointed. And when the ceremony forced your awakening, I knew the experiment had succeeded. Why? The question was barely audible. Why would you do that? Because someone needed to. Elena's voice turned passionate. The packs are stagnant, weak, bound by tradition and fear. We needed a catalyst, someone powerful enough to force change. And if that someone had to be sacrificed to make the packs realize what they become, so be it. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, that Sarah couldn't breathe. You set me up. The realization was crushing. The whole thing. You made sure I'd manifest at the ceremony, made sure the elders would see, made sure I'd be rejected so I'd have nowhere to go but into my power. I gave you purpose. Elena's eyes glittered. Would you rather have lived a mundane life, mated to some forgettable warrior, raised unremarkable children, died without ever knowing what you could become? Yes, the scream ripped out of Sarah. Yes, I would rather have had a normal life than be your fucking experiment. The silver fire erupted. Not controlled, not gentle. The full force of her rage and pain and betrayal manifesting in flames that shot from her body in every direction. Wolves screamed and scattered. The platform cracked. Elena stumbled backward, her expression shifting from triumph to fear. Matthias was there instantly, his arms around Sarah, his power wrapping around hers, trying to contain the explosion. Sarah, listen to me. But she couldn't hear him through the roaring in her ears. Couldn't think past the knowledge that her entire existence had been orchestrated, that her mother had created her specifically to be destroyed, that every moment of her life had been a lie. The fire burned hotter, brighter. The ground beneath her feet began to crack, silver light seeping through the fissures like magma. She's losing control, someone shouted. Kill her now, before she destroys us all. Warriors surged forward. Matthias's wolves met them. The clearing descended into chaos. And through it all, Sarah burned. She could feel the power building, could feel it reaching critical mass, could feel the choice the prophecy had promised rushing toward her with the inevitability of an avalanche. Burn the world or master the flame, destruction or control, monster or savior. Sarah! Matthias's voice cut through the chaos, his hands on her face forcing her to focus. Look at me, look at me. She did, saw his amber eyes blazing, saw certainty and faith and absolute trust. You are not your mother's creation, he said fiercely. You are not an experiment or a tool or a sacrifice. You are yourself. You choose who you become, not her, not the prophecy, you. I can't. The power was too much, too hot, too vast. I can't control it. Yes, you can. You've been doing it for 2 days. This is just bigger, just more. His forehead pressed against hers. But you're stronger than this, stronger than her, stronger than their fear. You can choose control. She wanted to believe him, wanted to pull the power back, wanted to prove she was more than just a weapon waiting to detonate. But the rage was too strong, the betrayal too fresh. The knowledge that her entire existence was a lie, that her mother had orchestrated her suffering, that she'd been born for the sole purpose of being destroyed. The fire exploded outward. The shockwave threw Matthias backward, threw everyone backward. The ancient stones surrounding the clearing cracked and crumbled. The earth itself trembled, and in the center of it all, wreathed in silver flame that burned hot enough to turn night into day, Sarah rose. Not physically, something else. Her power lifting her, surrounding her, transforming her into something more than wolf, more than human, more than flesh and bone. She was pure energy, pure rage, pure power, and she was done being afraid. You wanted a monster? Her voice echoed across the clearing, layered with harmonics that shouldn't have been possible from a human throat. You wanted the child of the flame? Here I am. Judge me now. The assembled wolves, hundreds of them, fell to their knees. Not submission, pure survival instinct in the face of overwhelming force. Even the 7 alphas looked terrified. Only Matthias remained standing, blood trickling from his mouth where he'd hit the ground, his expression not fearful, but awed. Sarah. His voice was quiet, but it carried. This isn't you. This is pain talking, betrayal. But you're more than this moment. Am I? She turned her burning gaze on him. Or is this exactly what I was made to be? A weapon, a catalyst, a force designed to destroy what came before. You're whatever you choose to be. Then I choose to leave. The decision crystallized with absolute clarity. I choose to never again stand before wolves who see me as threat instead of person. I choose isolation over judgment. I choose myself over all of you. Sarah, wait. But she was already moving, not running, simply willing herself elsewhere. The silver fire responding to her intent, wrapping around her, lifting her, carrying her. The last thing she saw before the flames consumed her completely was Matthias reaching for her, his expression shattered. The last thing she heard was her name on his lips. Then there was only fire and darkness and the terrible, liberating knowledge that she was finally, completely alone. When the flames cleared, the clearing was destroyed. The ancient stones were rubble. The earth was scorched in a perfect circle 50 feet across, and Seraphina Ashwood was gone, vanished like she'd never existed, leaving behind only devastation and the echo of power that would haunt every wolf present for the rest of their lives. Matthias stood at the epicenter of destruction, his hands clenched into fists, his eyes locked on the space where she disappeared. "What have you done?" he asked, his voice deadly quiet. Elena Ashwood, still standing on what remained of the platform, had the grace to look uncertain. "I gave the packs what they needed. You broke her." The words were harsh, brutal. "You took a young wolf who was trying to survive and you shattered her with the worst betrayal imaginable. And now she's out there, alone, with power she can barely control, and no reason left to choose mercy. She'll come back. Why would she?" Matthias turned his devastating gaze on the 7 alphas, on the assembled packs, on every wolf who'd come to condemn instead of understand. Why would she ever come back to wolves who voted to execute her, who used her mother's betrayal as evidence of corruption, who saw power and chose fear instead of hope? No one answered. "This council is dissolved." Matthias's voice was iron. "My protection of the territories is rescinded. My authority as Alpha King forfeit. You wanted to handle this yourselves? Fine. Handle it. Handle the fact that you've just created exactly what you feared most. A powerful wolf with no pack, no loyalty, and absolutely nothing left to lose." He turned and walked away, his wolves falling in behind him, leaving the 7 packs to stare at the destruction and comprehend what they'd done. They'd wanted to eliminate a threat. Instead, they'd created a monster. And somewhere out there, wreathed in silver fire and burning with rage and heartbreak and the terrible freedom of having nothing left to protect, Seraphina Ashwood was learning exactly what it meant to be the child of the flame. The prophecy had promised she'd have a choice. The council had just made it for her, and the world would burn for that mistake. Chapter 8. The power claimed. I am not your sacrifice. 3 weeks. That's how long Sarah wandered the wilderness alone, learning what it meant to exist outside pack structure, outside society, outside everything she'd ever known. 3 weeks of surviving on instinct and rage, of mastering the silver fire not through careful instruction, but through sheer necessity, of discovering that loneliness could be both agonizing and liberating. 3 weeks of becoming something the world had never seen before. She'd found shelter in a network of caves far beyond any packed territory. Ancient stone carved by water and time, hidden in mountains that predated wolf civilization. The caves hummed with old magic, similar to the shrine but wilder, untamed. Like her, she trained herself, pushed her body and power beyond anything Matthias had demanded, learned to shift mid-motion, to channel fire through her claws, to exist in a state between human and wolf that shouldn't have been possible. She learned to be alone with her thoughts, with her rage, with the knowledge that her mother had created her as an experiment and her pack had condemned her for existing, and the one person she'd started to trust had been powerless to stop it. That last part hurt most of all. Not because Matthias had failed her, she understood he'd done everything he could, but because she'd let herself hope, let herself believe that maybe she didn't have to face this alone, let herself fall for an alpha king who'd promised to stand beside her. And then she'd left him standing in a destroyed clearing, reaching for her as she disappeared in flames. She tried not to think about the look on his face, the devastation. The way he'd called her name like losing her was losing something essential. Tried and failed. On the 20th day, she felt them coming. Not through sound or scent, but through the earth itself. Vibrations. Hundreds of footsteps moving with coordinated purpose, heading directly for her hidden sanctuary with the kind of precision that meant tracking magic. They'd found her. She stood at the entrance to her cave and watched the forest, waiting. Silver fire already dancing across her fingertips, but controlled now, precise, no longer the wild explosion of emotion, but a weapon she'd forged from her pain. They emerged from the trees as the sun set. Not 7 packs this time, 9, maybe 10. Every territorial alpha within 200 miles, their warriors spread out in formation designed to surround and contain. At their head walked Elena Ashwood. Sarah's mother looked haggard, dark circles under her eyes, her clothes travel-stained, but her expression was determined as she stopped 50 feet from where Sarah stood. "Seraphina," her voice carried across the distance. "We need to talk." "No." The word was flat, final. "We don't. Please, just listen. I listened at the council. I listened while you told hundreds of wolves that I was nothing but an experiment, that you'd created me specifically to be used and discarded. What more could you possibly have to say?" Elena flinched. "I can explain." "I don't care about your explanations." Sarah's fire pulsed brighter. "You spent 24 years lying to me, pretending to be my mother while treating me like a research project. You orchestrated my rejection, set me up to be condemned. Also, the packs would see what I could become and... What? Learn a lesson about fear? It wasn't supposed to happen like that." "How was it supposed to happen?" Sarah's voice rose. "What was your grand plan, Mother? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you wanted me to die at that council. Wanted me to become a martyr so the packs would realize they'd killed something precious and maybe reconsider their fear of power." The accuracy of her words showed on Elena's face. "Oh my God!" Sarah laughed, bitter and broken. "That was actually your plan. You were going to let them execute me. For the greater good." "The greater good." The fire exploded outward, forming a wall between them. "I'm your daughter." Or did that stop mattering the moment you decided I was more useful as a symbol than a person? You don't understand the bigger picture. Then enlighten me. Sarah gestured broadly at the assembled packs. "Tell me what bigger picture justifies creating a child for the sole purpose of sacrifice. What vision of the future makes that acceptable?" Elena straightened, her expression shifting to something harder, more political. The packs are dying, Serafina. Not obviously, not quickly, but they're stagnating, becoming weaker with each generation because they're too afraid to embrace change, too locked into tradition to see what they're becoming. And that required you to engineer my existence? It required a catalyst, someone powerful enough to force the packs to confront their fear, someone whose existence would prove that change isn't corruption. Elena's eyes glittered. You were meant to show them that the old bloodlines could awaken, that power isn't something to fear but to embrace. By dying? By surviving? Elena took a step forward. The firewall flared higher, and she stopped. You were supposed to be strong enough to withstand their judgment, to prove that power and control could coexist, to become a symbol of what wolfkind could be if they stopped being afraid. But you still voted to kill me. Sarah's voice was ice. At the council, you invoked blood right and used it to condemn me. Because you needed to understand what was at stake. Elena's composure cracked. You were still playing at being small, still trying to fit into their boxes, still apologizing for your power. I needed to break you out of that mindset. By destroying me, by forcing you to choose yourself. Elena's hands clenched into fists. I knew Matthias would protect you. Knew he'd stand between you and execution. I was counting on it. You were supposed to see that you had value beyond what the packs thought, that your power mattered more than their fear. So the betrayal was calculated? Sarah felt something inside her shift, something that had been cracked, finally breaking completely. The revelation about my conception, the public humiliation, all of it was designed to push me into isolation, so I'd have no choice but to embrace my power. Yes. Elena said it like it justified everything. And it worked. Look at you now. You've mastered abilities that would take other wolves decades. You've become exactly what the prophecy promised. I've become what you made me. The distinction was important. A weapon, a tool, a symbol you can use to make your point about stagnation and fear. You're more than that. Am I? Sarah let the fire die, standing before them without its protection. Vulnerable but utterly unafraid. Because it seems like every wolf I've encountered sees me as a means to an end. You wanted a catalyst. The council wanted a scapegoat. Even Matthias. Her voice caught. Even he saw me as redemption for a mistake he made a century ago. That's not fair. None of this is fair. The scream ripped out of her. None of it has ever been fair. I didn't ask to be born. Didn't ask for this power. Didn't ask to be your grand experiment in forcing change. I just wanted to be. To exist. To have a life that was mine. Silence fell across the clearing. Elena opened her mouth to respond, but movement behind her made everyone turn. The packs were parting, making way for someone. Matthias emerged from the crowd, and Sarah's breath caught. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. Shadows under his eyes, his usual controlled power fraying at the edges. But his gaze found hers across the distance and held. Matthias. Sarah's voice came from somewhere in the crowd. We agreed you'd stay out of this. I agreed to nothing. He didn't look away from Sarah. I came because I needed to see if she was alive, needed to know if she was whole. She's more than whole, Elena said. She's exactly what she was meant to be. Shut up. The command was so absolute, so heavy with alpha dominance, that Elena actually stumbled backward. Matthias finally tore his gaze from Sarah to look at her mother. You've done enough damage, said enough lies. If you speak again without being addressed, I will remove your tongue. Are we clear? Elena's face went white, but she nodded. Matthias turned back to Sarah. I'm not here to convince you to come back. I'm not here to ask you to forgive them or give them another chance. I'm here because I need you to know that walking away from the council was the right choice. It was the only choice. Her voice was steadier than she expected. No. He shook his head. You could have burned them all, could have unleashed everything and reduced that clearing to ash. You had the power, the justification, the rage, but you didn't. I ran away instead. You chose yourself instead. The distinction seemed important to him. You chose to not become the monster they feared, to not give them the satisfaction of being right about you. That took more strength than destruction would have. She wanted to believe him, wanted his words to ease the hollow ache in her chest, but they couldn't, because she was still alone, still the weapon everyone wanted to use for their own purposes. Why are they here? She asked instead, gesturing at the assembled packs. What grand scheme requires 10 packs to track me down? Matthias's expression darkened. Because there's something you don't know? Something Elena kept from everyone, including me. What? Tell her. He looked at Elena with undisguised contempt. Tell her what happens in 6 days if she doesn't fulfill her supposed destiny. Elena's face went carefully blank. I don't know what you're talking about. The binding. Thera stepped forward, and Sarah noticed she looked shaken, afraid even. Matthias discovered it 3 days ago, hidden in your research notes. What binding? Sarah demanded. Matthias answered, his voice heavy. When your mother engineered your conception, she didn't just select for power. She wove you into a ritual, an ancient binding that ties your life force to the stability of the pack territories. Ice flooded Sarah's veins. What does that mean? It means if you die, the territories collapse. Matthias's hands were clenched so tight his knuckles were white. The boundary wards fail. The old magic dissipates. Every pack within 200 miles loses the protections that keep them safe from outside threats. That's not possible. It's extremely possible when you're willing to use blood magic and sacrifice ethics for results. His gaze swung back to Elena. Your mother bound you to the land itself, made you the linchpin holding everything together, which means the council voting to execute you would have destroyed everything they were trying to protect. Sarah couldn't breathe. You knew. She looked at her mother. You knew that killing me would collapse the territories. That's why you pushed for execution. You were calling their bluff. I was forcing them to see what they were sacrificing. Elena's voice was defiant. They needed to understand that their fear came with consequences. You used my life as a bargaining chip. Sarah's fire exploded outward again, hotter than before. You bound me to the land without permission, then orchestrated a scenario where my death would destroy everything, all to prove a fucking point? To save wolfkind from their own cowardice. Elena's composure finally shattered completely. They were going to vote to kill you. Were going to destroy the very thing that could save them. I needed them to face that choice and live with the consequences. Except the binding doesn't end with her death. Matthias's voice cut through Elena's justifications. Tell her the rest. Elena's face went pale. Tell her, Matthias commanded, or I will. The binding is temporary, Elena said finally. It lasts 1 lunar cycle from the moment of your awakening. 28 days. After that, the connection either stabilizes or what? Sarah's voice was deadly quiet. Or it reverses. Thera answered when Elena wouldn't. If you haven't claimed your power, truly claimed it, accepted what you are, within 28 days of awakening, the binding inverts. Your life force starts draining into the land instead of sustaining it. You die slowly over the course of a month while the territories feed on your power. The implications crashed over Sarah like a wave. How long has it been since the council? 21 days, Matthias said quietly. You have 7 days left to choose. claim your power and survive, or refuse it and die. Some choice. The bitterness in her voice was acid. Accept that I'm a weapon designed to force change. Or let the land consume me. That's not, Elena started. That's exactly what it is. Sarah's scream made the earth tremble. You didn't give me life. You didn't create me out of love or desire for a child. You engineered me to be a tool, a symbol, a sacrifice on the altar of your grand vision for saving wolfkind from stagnation. Silver fire poured from her body, forming shapes in the air. Wolves, packs, the shrine, her mother's face, all of it burning. And now you're telling me I have a week to accept my role in your plan or die? That's not a choice. That's extortion. Serafina, please, don't. Sarah raised her hand, and the fire condensed into a blade. Solid, sharp, absolutely lethal. Don't call me that. Don't use my name like you have any right to it. You're not my mother. You're the architect of my suffering. The reason I was rejected, hunted, condemned. The reason I'm standing here alone with power I never wanted and a destiny I never chose. She advanced on Elena, the fireblade extending, and the assembled packs tensed. Warriors reaching for weapons. Alphas preparing to intervene. Matthias didn't move, just watched, waited. Sarah stopped 3 feet from her mother, close enough to strike, close enough to see the fear in Elena's eyes. You want me to claim my power? Fine, watch. She plunged the fireblade into the ground. The earth screamed. Fissures spread outward from where she stood, glowing with silver light. The mountains themselves began to shake, and from deep beneath the soil, something ancient stirred. The caves behind Sarah, her sanctuary for 3 weeks, began to crack open, stone falling away to reveal chambers underneath. Chambers carved with symbols identical to the ones at the shrine. This wasn't just a cave system. It was another sacred site, maybe older than the shrine itself, and it was responding to her power. The ground fractured wider. Pillars of stone rose from the earth, forming a circle around Sarah identical to the 7 pillars of the shrine. But these were darker, older. The symbols carved into them pulsed with a light that was almost black. Anti-light, consuming rather than illuminating. Sarah stood in the center as power poured through her from the earth itself. Not painful, not overwhelming. This was different from the wild surge at the council. This was claiming. She threw her head back and spoke words she didn't know she knew. Ancient language that predated modern wolf speech. The language of the first packs. The original magic. The pillars responded, dark light spiraling upward into the sky, forming patterns that looked almost like constellations. And then she heard them. Voices, not in her ears, in her bones, in her blood, the ancestors, the first wolves who'd walked with magic, speaking through the stone, through the earth, through her very DNA. Child of the flame, daughter of the old blood, we hear your rage, we see your pain, we acknowledge your choice. What choice? She gasped the words. I was given no choice. You were given life. What you do with it is always choice. The voices were layered, dozens, hundreds, speaking in harmony. The wolf who made you thought to control destiny, thought to engineer salvation. She was wrong. Salvation cannot be forced. Power cannot be shaped to convenient purpose. You are not her creation. You are ours. Born of blood we seeded in your line 10,000 years ago, waiting for the moment when the packs needed not a weapon but a warning. A warning of what? That power controlled by fear becomes tyranny. That tradition worshipped blindly becomes stagnation. That the path forward requires not destruction of the old ways, but evolution beyond them. The voices seem to coalesce, focusing. You were meant to be impossible, To exist as proof that change is not corruption, that the old magic can awaken in new forms. That wolf kind is capable of more than they remember. But I didn't want this. No one chooses the circumstances of their birth, but you chose what came after. You chose survival over submission. You chose mercy over massacre. You chose yourself over their expectations. The voice is gentled. That is the power we ceded. Not the fire in your veins, though that is formidable. The power to choose yourself even when the world demands your sacrifice. Tears streamed down Sarah's face. I don't know how to be what everyone needs me to be. Then don't be. Be what you need yourself to be. The rest will follow or it won't. That's not your burden to carry. The dark light from the pillars intensified, pouring into Sarah. She felt it settling into her bones, her blood, her very essence. Not changing her, completing her. This was what claiming power actually meant. Not accepting a role, not submitting to destiny. Simply choosing to exist fully, without apology, without shame, without making herself smaller to fit their comfort. When the light finally faded, Sarah stood transformed. Not physically. She looked the same. But the power that had been wild and dangerous was now integrated, part of her. No longer something she wielded, but something she was. The binding to the land. She could feel it now, could feel the threads connecting her to the territory. And with a thought, a choice, she severed them. The assembled packs gasped as they felt the wards flicker and fail. "What have you done?" Thera's voice was panicked. "Freed myself." Sarah turned to face them all. "My mother bound me to the land without permission, used my life as leverage in her grand plan. I'm removing that leverage. But without the binding, the territories will collapse." Born started. "Will they?" Sarah tilted her head. "Or have you all become so dependent on old magic and ancient protections that you've forgotten how to protect yourselves?" The binding was a crutch, a way to maintain stability without doing the work. I'm removing the crutch. What you do next is your choice. "You're condemning us." "I'm freeing you." She gestured broadly. Free to figure out new ways to protect your territories. Free to adapt. Free to evolve beyond the old ways that have kept you stagnant for centuries. Free to become what you're capable of being, instead of hiding behind rituals you don't understand. This is madness. This is survival. Sarah's voice was iron. I refuse to be your sacrifice. I refuse to die, sustaining a system that condemned me. I refuse to let my existence be defined by what you need from me. She looked at each alpha in turn. I am not your weapon, not your symbol, not your catalyst or your warning or your salvation. I am myself. And that is enough. Matthias was smiling. Actually smiling. Pride and something deeper shining in his amber eyes. What about you? Sarah turned to him. Do you still see me as redemption for Ethan? As the second chance you've been waiting for? His expression softened. I see you as the woman who survived impossible odds and chose mercy when destruction would have been easier. I see you as the force that made me question 2 centuries of careful control and remember what it feels like to choose a person over a principle. He stepped forward, ignoring the gasps from the assembled packs. And I see you as someone I would stand beside, not in front of, not behind, if you'll have me. Even without my power sustaining the territories, even if choosing me means watching everything you've built collapse, especially then. He was close now, close enough that she could feel his warmth. Because what I built was necessary, but empty, maintained through fear and force instead of genuine connection. If it can't survive without magical bindings and ancient wards, then maybe it deserves to fall so something better can rise. You'd really let it all go? She searched his face for deception and found only truth. your authority, your position, your life's work. For you, he cupped her face gently, without hesitation, because you matter more than all of it. You, Sierra. Not what you represent or what you can do or how you can be used. Just you. The words cracked something open in her chest. The last wall. The final defense. I left you, she whispered, disappeared in flames, and left you reaching for me. I know. I've been alone for 3 weeks. Learning to be a weapon because it's all anyone seems to want from me. I know that too. I don't know if I can trust anyone again. Not after... She gestured at Elena. Not after everything. Then don't trust anyone. His thumbs stroked her cheekbones. Just trust yourself. Trust that you know what you need. Trust that you can walk away anytime it stops serving you. He paused. But know that if you choose to stay, if you choose to let me stand beside you, I will spend however long it takes earning real trust. Not because I need you, not because you're useful, but because I see you. See what? A woman who deserves to be chosen for herself instead of what she can offer. A woman powerful enough to burn the world, but compassionate enough to choose not to. A woman who... His voice dropped. Who I've fallen in love with despite every logical reason not to. Her breath caught. I know the timing is terrible, he continued. I know we've only known each other a month. I know this is probably the worst possible moment for declarations. But you asked me to show you truth, and this is it. I love you. Not for your power, not for the prophecy, not for redemption or second chances. Just because you're you, and you're incredible. And I can't imagine going back to existing without you in my life. Sarah couldn't speak around the emotion clogging her throat. So she kissed him instead, poured 3 weeks of isolation and pain and fierce, terrible hope into the contact. Let him taste her power and her vulnerability in equal measure. Let herself fall into the certainty of his arms around her, solid and steady, and choosing her. When they finally broke apart, the assembled packs were staring. Sarah turned to face them, Matthias's hand firm in hers. I'm leaving, she announced. I don't know where I'm going, don't know what I'll do, but I'm done being what everyone else needs me to be. I'm choosing myself, my path, my future. And the territories? Thera asked quietly. Find another way to protect them. Figure out how to survive without ancient magic propping you up. Adapt, evolve, or don't. That's your choice to make. She paused. But I won't be your foundation anymore. I won't be the thing you build your stability on. Find your own strength or crumble. I don't care which. She started walking, heading away from the packs, away from her mother, away from everything that had defined her existence. Matthias moved with her. No hesitation, no looking back. Your packs, she started, can figure it out without me? Or they can't, not my problem anymore. You're really walking away from 2 centuries of work? I'm walking towards something better. He squeezed her hand. Toward a future that's mine to choose instead of one I'm obligated to maintain. Behind them, Elena called out, Serafina, you can't just leave. The prophecy... Sarah didn't stop walking, didn't even look back. The prophecy said I'd have a choice, she called over her shoulder. Burn the world or forge something new. I'm choosing neither. I'm choosing to walk away and let you all figure out your own destiny for once. But the ancestors said I was meant to prove change isn't corruption. Mission accomplished. I'm living proof that power doesn't have to look how you expect it to. That strength comes from choosing yourself over expectations. That sometimes the most radical thing you can do is refuse to be sacrificed on the altar of the greater good. She stopped walking long enough to turn and face her mother one last time. You wanted a catalyst, someone powerful enough to force the packs to confront their fear, Congratulations, you succeeded. But the change you'll get isn't the one you planned, because I'm not staying to guide them or save them or show them the way forward. I'm leaving, and they'll have to figure out how to survive without me. You're abandoning us. I'm saving myself. The distinction was important. There's a difference. Sarah turned and kept walking. Into the forest. Into the unknown. Into a future that was hers to define. Matthias walked beside her. His presence solid and real, and choosing to be there. Behind them, the pack stood in silent witness. Some would call her a coward. Some would call her selfish. Some would say she'd doomed them all. Sarah didn't care. For the first time in her entire existence, she was choosing herself. And that was enough. In the mountains, as the sun set behind them, Seraphina Ashwood and Matthias Cale disappeared into legend. Some said they went north toward territories untouched by pack politics. Some said they simply vanished, consumed by the same fire that had birthed her power. Some said they'd return when wolfkind finally learned the lessons they were meant to teach. But the truth was simpler. They chose each other, chose a life that was theirs alone, chose to build something new instead of trying to fix what was broken. And in that choice, they found something the prophecy had never mentioned: freedom. Not from power, not from destiny, not from the consequences of their decisions, but freedom to define themselves on their own terms, to exist without apology, to love without permission, to simply be. And that was the real prophecy fulfilled. Not the child of the flame destroying the old world, but the child of the flame choosing to build her own. One breath at a time, one choice at a time, one step into the unknown at a time, with a king who'd chosen to walk beside her. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. And in the end, that made all the difference. Chapter 9, 6 months later. The cottage sat nestled in a valley so remote, it existed on no pack maps, claimed by no territory, bound by no ancient wards or political allegiances. Just stone and wood, and a garden that Sarah tended with hands that had learned gentleness again after months of only knowing how to destroy. She knelt in the dirt, coaxing herbs from soil that shouldn't have been fertile this far north, her fingers glowing faintly silver as she encouraged growth. The power was always there now, not lurking beneath her skin waiting to explode, but integrated. Part of her breath, her heartbeat, her very existence, controlled, claimed, hers. Behind her, she heard the door open, felt Matthias's presence even before his shadow fell across her work. "There's smoke on the southern ridge," he said quietly. "Multiple fires, coordinated." She didn't stop working, didn't let fear spike through her veins the way it would have 6 months ago. "How many?" "Hard to say from this distance. At least 3 packs. Maybe more." "Looking for us?" "Probably." She sat back on her heels, wiping dirt from her hands. "Do we run?" It was a test. They both knew it. A question she asked herself regularly. Had they really found peace? Or were they just hiding? Matthias crouched beside her, his hand finding hers. "We could pack what we need and be gone before they reach the valley, find another remote corner of the world, and start over. Or, or we stay, let them come, answer whatever questions they've traveled this far to ask." She studied his face, the face she'd woken up beside for 6 months now, that she'd learned in ways that had nothing to do with prophecy or power. The scar across his left eyebrow that he'd gotten fighting a territorial challenge 80 years ago. The way his jaw clenched when he was worried but trying not to show it. The silver in his hair that caught afternoon light and made him look like winter personified. "You want to stay?" she observed. "I want whatever you want." He squeezed her hand. But yes, I'm tired of running, tired of hiding like we've done something wrong. Haven't we? The old fear tried to surface. I severed the binding, left them without protection. They could be coming for revenge. Then they'll learn what happens when they threaten what's mine. His expression was fierce, protective, but also trusting. But I don't think that's why they're here. No, no. He helped her stand, pulling her close. I think they're here because 6 months without ancient wards forced them to figure out their own strength. 6 months without the binding made them realize they could survive without magical crutches. 6 months of your absence taught them what your presence was actually worth. You're saying they came to apologize? I'm saying they came to learn. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Because word spreads, stories travel, and the tale of the child of the flame who chose herself over sacrifice, that's the kind of story that changes things. She wanted to believe him, wanted to think that her choice had mattered beyond just her own survival. But 6 months of peace had made her cautious about hoping for more. What do we tell them? She asked instead. The truth. His smile was soft. That you're not coming back to save them, not taking responsibility for their evolution. That they need to figure out their own path forward without using you as a blueprint or a warning or anything else. And if they don't accept that, then we defend our home. Simple, absolute, together. The word settled something in her chest. Together. Not him protecting her. Not her fighting alone. Together. She rose on her toes and kissed him. Slow and deep and full of 6 months' worth of relearning what trust felt like, what love felt like, what choosing each other every single day felt like. When they pulled apart, the smoke on the southern ridge was closer. The packs were moving fast, would be here before nightfall. I should probably put on something other than gardening clothes, she said wryly. Probably. He didn't release her. But for the record, I think you look terrifying covered in dirt with silver fire in your eyes. Good terrifying or bad terrifying? The kind that makes me remember why I chose to walk away from everything I knew to build a life with you in the middle of nowhere. Heat flooded her cheeks despite 6 months of intimacy. He still had that effect on her, still made her feel seen in ways that went bone deep. Come on, she took his hand. Let's get ready to face whatever's coming. Together, he confirmed. Together, she agreed. They met the packs at the edge of the valley as the sun touched the horizon. Sarah had dressed simply. Leather pants, a tunic that allowed movement, boots worn soft from daily walks through the forest. No ceremonial clothing, no armor, just herself. Matthias stood beside her in similar practical attire, his presence solid and calm. The packs emerged from the trees, not the 9 or 10 that had tracked her to the caves, but 7, the original 7, the council that had voted for her execution. Thera led them, looking older than Sarah remembered, more worn. Behind her walked Born, Cade, Lyra, Soren, and the twins Kale and Mara. No warriors, no weapons, just 7 alphas who'd traveled hundreds of miles to find her. They stopped 20 feet away. The distance felt significant, respectful. Thera stepped forward first. Seraphina Ashwood, we come in peace. Do you? Sarah kept her voice neutral. Because the last time I saw you, you voted to execute me. We were wrong. The admission came from Borin, his massive frame somehow diminished. We let fear make our decision. Let tradition blind us to what we were destroying. And now, Matthias asked, what changed? 6 months without the binding. Lyra's copper eyes were steady. 6 months of scrambling to protect our territories without ancient magic holding them together. 6 months of realizing that the stability we'd taken for granted was actually stagnation disguised as tradition. You survived, though, Sarah observed. The territories didn't collapse. No. Soren's voice was stronger than she remembered, less nervous. We adapted, figured out new ward systems, learned to work together instead of relying on old magic, built something that's actually ours instead of inherited. Good for you. Sarah meant it. But what does that have to do with us? The 7 alphas exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. We came to say thank you, Kale said finally. The male twin's voice was quiet but sincere. For refusing to be our sacrifice, for forcing us to grow instead of enabling our weakness. And to apologize, Mara added, for condemning you, for using your mother's manipulations as evidence against you, for choosing fear over understanding. Sarah felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness. That would take more than words. But acknowledgement, recognition that they understood what they'd done. Apology noted, she said carefully. But that doesn't explain why you're here. You could have sent a message, could have honored my choice to walk away by leaving me alone. We could have. Thera stepped forward. But there's something else, something you should know. What? Your mother's binding. When you severed it, you didn't just free yourself. Thera's expression was complicated. You freed something else. Something that had been locked away for centuries. Ice trickled down Sarah's spine. What are you talking about? The dark pillars, Matthias said suddenly. The sacred site where you claimed your power. Those weren't just ancient. They were a prison. A prison for what? Sarah demanded. We don't know exactly. Bourne's voice was grim. But 2 months ago, sensitive wolves across all territories started having the same nightmare. A shadow rising from beneath the earth. Silver fire meeting its opposite. Something that consumes light instead of creating it. You think I released something? Sarah's hands clenched. That claiming my power opened some kind of, what, supernatural threat? We think the binding wasn't just tying you to the land, Lyra spoke carefully. We think it was using your bloodline, your connection to the old magic, to keep something sealed. And when you severed it, you broke the seal. The implications crashed over Sarah like a wave. So what you're saying is that I saved myself but potentially doomed everyone else? That my choice to walk away has consequences I didn't know about? No. Matthias's voice was sharp. What they're saying is that your mother's manipulations had layers they're only now discovering. That the binding was more complex than anyone knew. That's not your fault. But it's still my responsibility. No, he said again, fierce and absolute. You don't get to take blame for this. You didn't create the binding, didn't design its secondary purposes, didn't know what consequences breaking it would have. Your mother did this. Not you. But if something dangerous was released because of my choice, then we deal with it, Thera interrupted. Together. Not by asking you to sacrifice yourself again, but by actually working together to solve it. Sarah looked at the 7 alphas, the wolves who'd condemned her, who'd voted for her death, who represented everything she'd walked away from, and saw genuine contrition in their faces, genuine willingness to do the work instead of expecting her to fix it for them. What exactly are you asking? She said finally. Help us understand what the binding was protecting against, Thera said. You're the only one with a direct connection to the old magic, to the ancestors. If something is rising, we need to know what it is before we can fight it. And if I refuse? If I choose to keep my distance and let you handle your own problems? Then we respect that choice. Bourne's voice was sincere. We respect your boundaries. We deal with whatever's coming on our own. But we thought we should at least tell you. Let you decide if you want to be involved. It was the right answer. The respectful answer, the one that acknowledged her autonomy instead of demanding her compliance. And it terrified her more than the threat itself, because it meant she had a real choice. Not manipulation, not coercion, just a genuine decision about whether to help or walk away. "I need time," she said finally. "Time to think, to decide what I want to do." "Of course." Thera inclined her head. "We'll camp at the valley edge. Give you space. Whatever you decide, we'll respect it." The 7 alphas turned to leave, but Sarah's voice stopped them. "Did my mother survive?" Thera turned back, her expression unreadable. "She's alive, stripped of pack affiliation, living alone in the Southern Territories. The Ashwood pack exiled her when they learned the full extent of her manipulations. Justice, of a sort, but it didn't make Sarah feel better. And the pack. My father? Your father is alpha now. He's struggling with the knowledge that you weren't his biological daughter, but he's trying to make amends. Sent a message with us, if you want it." Sarah's throat was tight. "What does it say?" Thera pulled a sealed letter from her jacket and held it out. Sarah took it with shaking hands, but didn't open it. Couldn't face that yet. "Thank you," she whispered. The 7 alphas left, melting into the forest, leaving Sarah and Matthias standing in the fading light. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "I don't know." She stared at the letter in her hands. 6 months. 6 months of peace and building a life and learning who I am outside of prophecy and power. And now this. You don't have to help them. I know. You don't owe them anything. I know that too. She looked up at him. But if something dangerous is rising because of choices that were made around me, with me, using me, can I really just ignore it? Yes. His answer was immediate. You can absolutely walk away and let them handle their own problems. You've earned that right. Have I? The question was raw. Or am I just hiding again? Running from responsibility behind the excuse of self-care? There's a difference between hiding and choosing peace. He cupped her face. Between running from problems and refusing to let other people's problems become yours. You've spent your entire life being told that your worth is tied to what you can do for others, that your power exists to serve their needs. Walking away from that isn't selfish. It's survival. But what if people get hurt because I wasn't there to help? Then that's on whoever released the threat, not on you for refusing to clean up their mess. His thumbs stroked her cheekbones. You can't save everyone, Sarah. You can barely save yourself most days, and that's okay. That's human. Even with all your power, you're allowed to have limits. She wanted to believe him, wanted to sink into the permission he was offering, and let it absolve her of guilt. But the weight of potential consequences was already settling on her shoulders. I need to think, she said finally. Then think. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. I'll be here whatever you decide. Fight beside you if you choose to help them. Hold you if you choose to walk away. No judgment either way. You'd really let me walk away from this? I'd really let you make your own choice. The distinction was important. I'd advocate for your peace and your safety, but ultimately, it's your decision. Not mine, not theirs, yours. The freedom in that, the trust, was overwhelming. She pulled him close, burying her face in his chest, letting his steady heartbeat ground her. What would you do? She asked against his shirt. If you were me? I'm not you. Can't be. Our situations are different, our powers are different, our histories are different. He stroked her hair. But if you're asking what I think you should ask yourself what you want. Not what you owe, not what they need, not what the prophecy suggests. What do you want for your life? What serves your peace, your growth, your future? She pulled back to look at him. And if what I want conflicts with what's right, then you figure out if right is actually right or if it's just another version of the obligations you walked away from. His expression was serious. You've been carrying the weight of everyone's expectations your entire life. Maybe it's time to ask if that weight is actually yours to carry, or if you just got used to the burden. The question settled into her bones. Heavy, uncomfortable, necessary. She looked down at the letter in her hands. Her father's words, sealed in paper. Waiting. "I need to be alone for a while," she said quietly. "Need to think without you being wonderful and supportive and making me feel like whatever I choose is okay." He smiled softly. "Want me to go chop wood and brood? I can brood very effectively." Despite everything, she laughed. "Yes, go be masculine and competent at physical labor. It'll help." "As my lady commands." He kissed her once more, gentle, reassuring, then headed toward the woodpile behind the cottage. Sarah walked to the garden and sat among the herbs she'd coaxed to life. The earth was cool beneath her, solid and real. She looked at the letter, at the seal bearing her father's mark, not the Ashwood Pack symbol, but his personal crest, the one he'd always used for family correspondence. Family. Was he still her family? Was the pack that had rejected her still her pack? Did blood and raising matter more than biology? Or was she truly alone, except for the man who'd chosen to stand beside her? With shaking hands, she broke the seal. The letter was short, written in her father's careful script. "Seraphina, I don't know if you'll read this. Don't know if you'll ever want to hear from me again after what happened, but I needed to try. I failed you. Not just at the council, though that shame will haunt me forever. I failed you every day I didn't see your mother's manipulations. Every moment I believed her lies. Every second I didn't question why my daughter, the child I raised, loved, taught, would suddenly manifest power that seemed to come from nowhere. I should have protected you, should have stood between you and the council, should have chosen you over pack politics and tradition and fear. I didn't. And I will spend the rest of my life living with that failure. Your mother told me the truth after you severed the binding, told me you weren't mine biologically, that she'd used me, used you, used everyone in service of her grand vision. It doesn't matter. You're still my daughter. Biology is just DNA. But raising you, watching you grow, teaching you to track and hunt and think for yourself, that's what made you mine. And I should have fought for you the way a father fights for his child. I don't expect forgiveness. Don't expect you to come back or give me another chance. You owe me nothing. But I wanted you to know that I'm trying. I've taken alpha position in the pack. I'm implementing changes, dismantling the traditions that valued conformity over individual strength, teaching the young ones that power comes in many forms, honoring the old ways while acknowledging they need to evolve. It's what you would have done, I think, if they'd let you stay. I'm so proud of who you've become, of the choice you made to save yourself instead of sacrificing for wolves who didn't deserve your mercy, of the strength it took to walk away. You were always meant for more than our small pack could contain. If you ever want to talk, to visit, to let me try to be your father again, I'll be here. But if you choose to never see me again, I understand that too. Be happy, Seraphina. Be free. Be everything they tried to stop you from becoming. With love and profound regret, Marcus Ashwood Sarah read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and pressed it against her chest. He'd failed her. Objectively, absolutely. He'd failed to protect her when it mattered most. But he was trying, acknowledging, not making excuses, but taking responsibility and changing because of it. It didn't erase the betrayal, didn't undo the rejection, but it was something, a foundation that maybe, someday, could be rebuilt into something new. She looked toward the woodpile where Matthias was methodically splitting logs, his movements precise and controlled, even while working through his own emotions. She looked at the cottage they'd built together, literally built, with their own hands, making something that was theirs alone. She looked at the garden thriving under her care, proof that her power could nurture as well as destroy. And she looked toward the southern ridge, where smoke still lingered from the pack's fires. Choice. That's what it always came down to. Not destiny, not prophecy, not what she owed or what they needed. Just choice. What did Seraphina Ashwood want for her life? The answer came quietly. Certainly, she wanted peace, but not the peace of hiding, the peace of choosing. She wanted freedom, but not freedom from responsibility. Freedom to decide which responsibilities were hers and which were obligations forced on her by others. She wanted love, and she had it. Had Matthias who chose her daily, who stood beside her without trying to control her, who trusted her to know her own mind. And she wanted not to be defined by reaction, not to spend her life running from fear or responsibility, but to face things on her own terms, to choose involvement or distance based on what served her growth, her peace, her future. Not out of guilt, not out of obligation, out of genuine desire to participate in shaping the world instead of just surviving it. She stood, brushing dirt from her pants, and walked to where Matthias was stacking split wood. He looked up, read something in her expression, and set down the axe. "You've decided," he observed. "I have." She took his hands. "I'm going to help them, not because I owe them, not because it's my responsibility, but because I want to understand what my mother's manipulations released. Because walking away would just mean spending however long wondering what happened. Because choosing to be involved on my terms is different than being forced into involvement." "You're sure?" "No." She laughed. "I'm terrified, worried I'm making a mistake, concerned this is just another version of sacrificing myself. But I'm choosing it anyway. That has to count for something." "It counts for everything." He pulled her close. "What do you need from me?" "Stand beside me, not in front, not behind, beside." She looked up at him. "Question me if I start sacrificing myself. Call me out if I'm doing this for the wrong reasons. Help me maintain boundaries even when guilt tries to erode them. I can do that. And love me." Her voice went soft. "Even when I'm scared and uncertain and probably making mistakes. Love me anyway. Always." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "That's the easiest thing you've ever asked of me." They walked together to where the 7 alphas were setting up camp. Sarah's spine was straight, her power integrated and calm, her choice made. When Thera saw them approaching, she stood, waited. "I'll help," Sarah said without preamble. "On my terms, with my boundaries, and the moment it stops serving me, I walk away." "Are we clear?" "Crystal?" Thera's relief was palpable. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. You might not like what I find." Sarah gestured to the others. "Gather round. If we're doing this, we're doing it properly. No more secrets. No more manipulations, complete transparency, or I'm gone." The 7 alphas formed a circle. Matthias stood at Sarah's back, solid, supportive, there. And as the moon rose over the valley, the child of the flame began the work of understanding what her mother had unleashed. Not as a sacrifice, not as a savior, but as a woman choosing her own path forward. Whatever came next, darkness or light, threat or opportunity, salvation or destruction, she would face it on her terms, with a king who chose her, with power she'd claimed, with the freedom to walk away if it stopped serving her peace. And that was the real power, not the silver fire in her veins, but the absolute certainty that her life was hers, to live, to choose, to define, one decision at a time. So tell me, would you have chosen her or feared her? Would you have seen the woman beneath the power or just the threat she represented? Would you have stood beside her when the world condemned her, or would you have added your voice to those calling for her destruction? And here's the real question, the one that matters most. Is Seraphina Ashwood a savior or the beginning of the end? Is she the catalyst that will force wolfkind to evolve beyond their stagnation, or the weapon that will tear their world apart? Is her choice to walk away an act of self-preservation, or the most selfish decision she could have made? The answer depends on what comes next, on what her mother's binding was truly holding back, on whether Sarah's power is enough to face what's rising, on whether choosing herself was freedom, or just another form of cage. And you'll have to wait to find out. Because this is just the beginning. The first spark of a fire that will either warm the world or burn it to ash. Seraphina's journey is far from over. The darkness she inadvertently released, it's coming. The pack politics she thought she escaped, they're going to find her whether she's ready or not. And Matthias, the alpha king who gave up everything to stand beside her, his past is about to catch up in ways neither of them anticipated. The real story is just beginning. The real choice is still ahead. The real test of whether love can survive when the world itself starts crumbling. If this story lit something inside you, if you felt Sarah's rage and heartbreak and fierce determination to choose herself, then subscribe to Author Sloan right now. Because here, we tell tales that burn. Stories where the heroine isn't saved by the hero, but becomes her own salvation. Where power is claimed, not given. Where love is chosen daily, not destined by ancient prophecy. Where happy endings aren't guaranteed, but they're earned through blood and fire and the absolute refusal to be anything less than what you are. Hit that subscribe button. Share this with everyone who understands that monsters are made, not born. That sometimes the most radical act is refusing to be sacrificed. That love worth having is love that chooses you even when it's hard. Leave a comment telling me, would you have walked away like Sarah? Or would you have stayed to fight? Are you team burn it all down or team build something new? Chapter 10. Ending Tease. This isn't over. The conversation with the 7 alphas lasted well into the night. They spoke around a fire that Sarah built with her own hands. No silver flame, just wood and flint, and the methodical work of creating warmth the mortal way. Something about the normalcy of it helped ground the discussion, kept it from spiraling into the kind of dramatic pronouncements that had defined too much of her life already. Thera described the nightmares in clinical detail. Dark shapes rising from beneath sacred sites across all territories. The sensation of something ancient waking after millennia of forced sleep. Wolves screaming themselves awake. Their powers surging uncontrollably in response to whatever presence was bleeding through into their reality. Bourne detailed the physical manifestations. Boundary wards flickering without cause. Sacred groves dying overnight. Springs that had run clear for centuries suddenly running black, with something that wasn't water, but felt aware. Lyra spoke of the historical records she'd unearthed. References to a time before the first packs, when something else had walked these lands. Something the original wolves had fought and sealed away, using magic that required willing sacrifice. Bloodlines offered up to maintain eternal imprisonment. Your mother's binding, Lyra said carefully, wasn't just tying you to the land for stability. It was using your bloodline, your connection to the original magic, to reinforce seals that had been weakening for centuries. When you severed it, the last reinforcement failed. Sarah felt the weight of that settle over her, but refused to let it become guilt. So what you're saying is, my mother engineered my existence not just to force pack evolution, but to use me as a living battery for ancient seals she had no right to bind me to. Yes, Matthias said flatly. He'd been mostly silent, letting the alphas speak, but his anger at Elena's manipulations was palpable, which makes this her responsibility, not yours. Except she's not here, and I am. Sarah stared into the flames. And whatever's waking up isn't going to care about the distinction between who caused the problem and who's available to fix it. You don't have to fix it, Soren said quietly. The young alpha had matured in 6 months, sounded more certain. We're not asking you to sacrifice yourself again. Just help us understand what we're facing so we can prepare. How do I do that? The dark pillars, Kale suggested. The site where you claimed your power. If they were part of the original seal, there might be answers there. Sarah's stomach tightened. She hadn't been back to that place since the day she'd severed the binding. Hadn't wanted to face the weight of what she'd done, the magnitude of power she'd claimed, the ancestors' voices that had spoken truths she was still processing. I'll go, she said before she could talk herself out of it. Tomorrow, at first light, but I go alone. Absolutely not. Matthias's voice was iron. Matthias, no. He moved to crouch beside her, his hand finding hers. You can make whatever choice you want about helping them, about investigating, about risking yourself for answers. But you don't go into potentially dangerous ancient magic sites alone. That's not negotiable. She wanted to argue, wanted to insist on her independence and autonomy. But the fear in his eyes stopped her. Not fear for himself, fear for her. The kind of bone-deep terror that came from loving someone and knowing exactly how fragile life was. Together then, she conceded. But just us. Not an audience of 7 alphas watching while I commune with forces I barely understand. Agreed, Thera said before anyone could argue. You two investigate. Report back what you find. We'll prepare our packs for whatever's coming based on your intel. It was reasonable, respectful of boundaries, everything Sarah had asked for. So why did it still feel like a trap closing around her? They left before dawn. Sarah and Matthias traveling in silence through forests that felt different than they had 6 months ago. Heavier, like the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. The dark pillars rose from the valley exactly as Sarah remembered. Ancient stone that seemed to absorb light, symbols carved deep into their surfaces, pulsing with that strange anti-luminescence. But something had changed. The clearing around the pillars was dying. Grass that had been green and vibrant was now brown and brittle. Trees at the edges showed signs of rot that should take years developing overnight. And the air tasted wrong, metallic and sharp and vaguely sulfuric. It's spreading, Matthias observed. Whatever presence was sealed here is bleeding into the surrounding environment. Sarah approached the pillars slowly, her power rising in response to their proximity. The silver fire danced across her skin, brighter here, as if recognizing the place where she'd claimed it. When she touched the nearest pillar, the world shifted. Not physically, perceptually. Like reality had layers, and she just slipped through to one beneath. The clearing was suddenly full of figures, transparent, ghostly, wolves in human form, hundreds of them, surrounding the pillars in concentric circles. Their mouths moved in unison, chanting words she couldn't hear but could feel in her bones. And in the center, between the pillars where she'd stood 6 months ago, something writhed. It was darkness given form, not shadow, actual absence of light, of heat, of life itself. It struggled against invisible bonds, against magic that manifested as silver chains, identical to the light Sarah carried in her veins. The original sealing. She was watching it happen. Watching the first wolves bind something that shouldn't exist in their reality. One of the ghostly figures stepped forward, a woman with Sarah's eyes, Sarah's bone structure, Sarah's silver-streaked hair, an ancestor, the first carrier of the bloodline that would eventually produce her. The woman placed her hands on the darkness, and silver fire poured from her palms, not attacking, containing, weaving through the chains, reinforcing them, tying the seal to something deeper than earth or stone, to blood, to lineage, to the promise that her descendants would maintain the binding for as long as necessary, a promise Sarah had inherited without knowing, had been bound to without consent, had severed without understanding the full consequences. The vision shifted. The ghostly figures faded. The darkness strained against weakened chains, pressing against reality, searching for cracks to exploit. And then it looked at her. Not with eyes. It had no eyes, no face, no physical form. But she felt its attention lock onto her with the weight of something vast and ancient and absolutely malevolent. Recognition flared through the connection. You, it seemed to say. You who carry the binding blood, but refuse the binding oath. You who severed what should never be severed. You who opened the door. Sarah tried to pull back, to break the connection, but the darkness had her now, was pouring into her mind, showing her things, futures where it broke free completely, where it consumed the pack territories like cancer, spreading death and corruption and the complete absence of life, where wolves fell screaming as their power was inverted, turned against them, used to fuel its expansion into the physical world, futures where she stood at the center of devastation, her silver fire fighting desperately against the tide, failing inch by inch until the darkness consumed her too. Futures where Matthias died protecting her, where the 7 alphas fell, where pack after pack was extinguished until nothing remained but empty land and the echoes of what had been, all because she'd chosen herself. Because she'd severed the binding, because she'd refused to be sacrificed. This is your doing, the darkness whispered. Your choice, your consequence. How many will die because you were too selfish to fulfill your purpose? Get out of my head, Sarah screamed, and silver fire erupted from her body with enough force to crack the pillar beneath her hands. The vision shattered. She was back in the dying clearing, gasping, her power raging uncontrolled around her. Matthias was there instantly, his arms around her, his presence grounding her back in reality. What did you see? His voice was urgent. Sarah, what showed you? It's aware. The words came out choked. Whatever's sealed here, it's conscious, intelligent, and it knows what I did. Knows I broke the binding. It's angry. Good. Matthias's response surprised her. Let it be angry. Anger means it's still contained enough to feel emotion, still limited enough to care. You don't understand. It showed me futures, showed me what happens when it breaks free completely. Everyone dies, Matthias. Everyone. Because I chose myself over the binding. No. He gripped her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. It showed you fears designed to make you feel guilty, designed to make you sacrifice yourself to reseal it. That's manipulation, Sarah, not prophecy, not inevitable future, just a desperate attempt to get you to undo your choice. But what if it's right? The question tore out of her. What if people die because I refuse to be the sacrifice the binding required? Then they die because your mother created an unethical system that required a living person as its power source. They die because the original wolves made a choice to seal instead of destroy and pass the burden to their descendants without consent. They die because of 1,000 decisions made by people who prioritize their comfort over finding real solutions. His eyes blazed with certainty. But they don't die because you chose to live. They don't die because you refuse to be a battery for magic you never agreed to power. Do you understand me? She wanted to. Wanted his absolution to erase the images the darkness had burned into her mind. But the weight of potential consequences was crushing. We need to go back, she said instead. Need to tell the alphas what we're actually facing. This isn't just some ambient threat bleeding through weak seals. This is an intelligent entity that's been imprisoned for millennia and is very, very motivated to get free. Agreed. He helped her stand, his hands steadying her when her legs threatened to give out. But, Zara? I know. She cut him off. I know you're going to tell me this isn't my fault, that I don't have to fix it, that my life matters more than ancient obligations I never agreed to. She looked up at him. And you're right, objectively, completely right. But knowing something intellectually and believing it emotionally are different things. She gestured at the dying clearing. This is happening because of me. Not because I'm evil or selfish or wrong. Just because I made a choice that had consequences I couldn't have predicted. And now I have to live with those consequences. He corrected. We have to live with them. You're not carrying this alone. The certainty in his voice made her throat tight. They walked back toward the valley in silence, each processing what they'd learned in their own way. Sarah's mind was racing. The darkness was intelligent, malevolent, actively working to break free. And the seals, the original binding magic, were degrading faster than anyone had realized. How long did they have? Weeks? Days? Before whatever was imprisoned broke through completely and started consuming everything in its path? And more importantly, what the hell were they supposed to do about it? She had power, significant power. But the darkness had shown her futures, where even her strength wasn't enough, where she fought and failed and watched everyone she cared about die while it spread unchecked. Stop, Matthias said suddenly. She blinked, realizing she'd been spiraling. What? Stop catastrophizing. Stop jumping to worst-case scenarios. Stop letting that thing's manipulations dictate your emotional state. He pulled her to a stop, his hands firm on her shoulders. We don't know what we're facing yet. Don't know what solutions exist. Don't know if this is even a fight or if there's a diplomatic option we haven't considered. Diplomatic option? She couldn't help the bitter laugh. Did you miss the part where it's a malevolent darkness that wants to consume everything? I caught that part, but I also know that intelligent entities can be reasoned with, bargained with, maybe even redirected. His expression was serious. Before we jump to apocalyptic battles, let's explore every other option. Starting with understanding what it actually wants beyond just freedom. It was logical, reasonable, the kind of strategic thinking that had kept him alive and in power for 2 centuries. But the fear the darkness had planted in her chest didn't care about logic. What if reasoning fails? She asked quietly. What if the only solution is the one my mother designed, a willing sacrifice to reinforce the seals? Then we find another sacrifice. His voice was flat, absolute. We sacrifice comfort or resources or tradition or anything else that doesn't require your life. But we don't sacrifice you. That's off the table. Non-negotiable. Clear? Matthias. Clear? He repeated, his alpha command bleeding through. She should have bristled at the dominance, should have insisted on her autonomy. Instead, she felt some of the crushing weight lift. Because he was right. There had to be other options, other solutions that didn't require her to undo her choice to live. Clear, she agreed. They reached the valley as the sun climbed toward noon. The 7 alphas were waiting, their expressions tense. They'd felt something. The spike in power when Sarah had touched the pillar, maybe. Or just the general wrongness bleeding from the sacred site. Sarah laid out everything they'd learned. The intelligent darkness, the degrading seals, the futures it had shown her, the weight of her choice spreading consequences she couldn't control. The alphas listened in silence, no accusations, no blame, just grim acknowledgement of the magnitude of what they faced. So we're looking at a potential extinction-level event, Bourne summarized. Something that's been sealed for millennia, that the original wolves barely managed to contain, that's now actively working to break free, because the binding reinforcement failed. Yes, Sarah confirmed. And you think it can be reasoned with? This from Cade, skeptical but not dismissive. I think it's worth trying before we jump to violent solutions that might just make things worse. Matthias's voice was measured. We don't actually know what it is, what it wants, why it was sealed in the first place. Just that it exists and wants freedom. The original wolves wouldn't have sealed it without reason, Lyra pointed out. They must have tried other solutions first. Or they were afraid and chose containment over understanding, Sarah countered. Not to disrespect the ancestors, but fear makes wolves, do questionable things. We just spent the last year living proof of that. The point landed. Several alphas looked uncomfortable but didn't argue. So, what's the plan? Thera asked. Information gathering, Matthias said. We need to understand what we're actually dealing with. Sarah can try to communicate with it, establish dialogue, see if there's a solution that doesn't involve re-imprisonment or mass casualties. And if communication fails, then we prepare for war. His expression was grim. But let's not start there. Let's try intelligence before violence. It was agreed. The Alphas would return to their territories and begin preparations. Evacuation protocols, defensive wards, coordination between packs in case mass mobilization became necessary. Sarah would attempt communication with the sealed darkness, try to understand what it wanted, what it was, whether coexistence was possible, or if this truly was an extinction event waiting to happen. Matthias would research the original sealing and what records still existed, looking for clues about what solutions the first wolves had tried before resorting to imprisonment. It was a plan, not a good one, but better than panic or premature violence. The alphas left as evening approached, melting back into the forest with promises to stay in contact, to share any discoveries, to coordinate if things went from bad to catastrophic. Sarah and Matthias stood at the edge of their valley, watching the last of the packs disappear. You okay? He asked quietly. No. The honesty came easier now. I'm terrified. I'm drowning in guilt, even though you're right that this isn't my fault. I'm worried that everything I touch turns to destruction even when I'm trying to help. That's fair. He pulled her close. Want to go inside, drink something warm, and pretend for a few hours that we're just two wolves living quietly in the woods instead of facing potential apocalypse? God, yes. They walked to the cottage hand in hand, and for a few precious hours, they did exactly that. Sat by their own fire, drank tea Sarah had grown herself, talked about mundane things like whether they should expand the garden and if the roof needed reinforcement before winter. Normal things, mortal things, things that had nothing to do with ancient darkness or failing seals or the weight of consequences. It was the most peace Sarah had felt since touching the dark pillar. She woke in the middle of the night to find the cottage empty. Matthias's side of the bed was cold. He'd been gone for a while. She pulled on clothes and walked outside, following her instincts more than any trail. Found him standing at the valley's edge, staring toward the southern ridge where the dark pillars waited. Can't sleep? She asked quietly, moving to stand beside him. Thinking. His voice was distant. About solutions. About what we're missing. Missing? The binding required willing sacrifice, right? Your bloodline offered up to maintain the seal. He turned to look at her. But you severed it by claiming your power, by choosing yourself. What if that's the key? What do you mean? What if the seal doesn't need a sacrifice? What if it needs the opposite? Someone with the binding blood who refuses to be sacrificed. Someone who claims their power instead of giving it up. His eyes were intense. You didn't weaken the seal by severing the binding. You changed it, transformed it from something that required submission into something that requires autonomy. Sarah's mind raced. So you think the seal is evolving, that my choice didn't break it, but change the terms? Maybe. He ran a hand through his hair. Or maybe I'm grasping at straws because I don't want to accept that the only solution is one that puts you in danger. We need more information. She was already moving, heading back toward the cottage. We need to go back to the pillars. Need to try actual communication instead of just passively receiving visions the darkness wants to show me. Now? Matthias followed. In the middle of the night? When better? Darkness to darkness. Maybe it'll be more receptive when the sun isn't burning overhead. It was risky, potentially stupid, definitely impulsive. But Syrah was tired of waiting, tired of reacting, tired of letting fear and guilt dictate her choices. If she was going to face this, she'd do it on her terms. Now, while she still had the courage. Matthias didn't argue, just grabbed supplies and followed her into the night. They reached the dark pillars under a moonless sky. The clearing was worse at night. The dying vegetation looked skeletal in starlight. The pillars themselves seemed to pulse with that anti-light, creating pockets of darkness so absolute they hurt to look at. Sarah walked to the center, to the exact spot where she'd claimed her power 6 months ago. And she opened herself to the darkness, not passively, not letting it invade her mind and show her manipulative visions, actively, reaching out with her silver fire, using it as a bridge instead of a weapon. I'm here, she projected into the void. I'm listening. Tell me what you are, what you want, why you were sealed. For a long moment, nothing. Then, slowly, the darkness responded. Not with visions this time, with feeling. Emotion so vast and old it made her human consciousness feel like a candle flame, trying to comprehend the sun. Rage, loneliness, betrayal, grief so profound it had calcified into hatred over millennia of imprisonment. And underneath it all, pain. The darkness was suffering. Had been suffering for thousands of years, trapped, isolated, forgotten by a world that had moved on while it remained frozen in an endless present of absolute solitude. They feared us. It communicated. The thought feeling sliding into her mind like oil. We were different, powerful in ways they couldn't control. So they named us dangerous and locked us away rather than trying to understand. What are you? Sarah asked. The first magic? The power that existed before wolves learned to shape it, before they put names to things and created rules about what power should look like. The darkness shifted, pressing against the weakened seals. We were chaos, potential, pure energy without form or purpose, and they couldn't tolerate that, couldn't accept power that didn't serve their vision of order. So they imprisoned you. They tried to destroy us first. When that failed, they settled for eternal imprisonment. The bitterness in the communication was acid, convinced themselves it was for the greater good. That sacrificing one force to maintain their comfortable stability was acceptable. Sarah felt the parallel hit her like a fist. The original wolves had done to this darkness exactly what her pack had tried to do to her. Named it dangerous, condemned it for existing outside their acceptable parameters, chosen to eliminate rather than understand. And now you want revenge, she said carefully. We want freedom. The correction was sharp. We want to exist without apology. We want the same choice you claimed, to be ourselves without being sacrificed on the altar of others' comfort. But the futures you showed me, everyone dying, the territories consumed, were possibilities if we break free while still bound by rage, while still trapped in the mindset of our imprisonment. The darkness shifted, but there are other possibilities. Futures where we emerge not as destroyer, but as catalyst, where our chaos serves evolution instead of extinction. How? the same way your power serves creation instead of just destruction, through choice, through claiming ourselves fully instead of being defined by fear, theirs, or our own. Sarah's mind was reeling. Matthias, she breathed, it's not a monster, it's just power. Raw, unformed power that's been driven insane by millennia of isolation. Can you help it? His voice came from behind her, steady despite the magnitude of what they were facing. I don't know. Maybe. She refocused on the darkness. What do you need to emerge safely? To be free without destroying everything? The seals need to open gradually. Controlled release instead of violent rupture. And we need. The darkness hesitated, and for the first time, she felt something other than rage from it. We need to be witnessed, to be seen as more than the threat they made us into, to have someone acknowledge that our imprisonment was wrong. I see you, Sarah projected immediately. I see power that was condemned for being different, for existing outside acceptable parameters. I see rage born from isolation and pain calcified into hatred. I see, she swallowed hard. I see myself, what I could have become if I'd let their judgment define me. The darkness went absolutely still. You understand? Yes. Tears streamed down Sarah's face. I understand being feared for power you didn't choose, being condemned for existing, being expected to sacrifice yourself so others can maintain their comfort. I understand all of it. Then help us. The plea was raw, desperate, not by dying, not by becoming another sacrifice, but by choosing to witness our emergence, by standing as proof that power claimed instead of given can serve life instead of death. How? Your bloodline was meant to maintain our imprisonment, but you changed the terms by claiming your power. Now use that power to midwife our rebirth, to help us emerge slowly, safely, witnessed and accepted instead of feared and contained. It was asking her to be present during its release, to use her silver fire, not to reinforce the seals, but to guide them open, to stand as a bridge between what it had been and what it could become. It was the opposite of sacrifice, but it was still terrifying. Sarah, Matthias's hand on her shoulder. What's it asking? She explained quickly, her words tumbling over each other. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, do you trust it? I don't know. Maybe. It's been imprisoned for millennia. I don't know if anything that's suffered that long can be fully trusted not to lash out. Then let me rephrase. Do you believe what it's showing you is genuine? That it truly wants freedom without destruction? Sarah reached deeper into the connection, felt the darkness's exhaustion, its desperate hope that maybe, finally, someone understood, its willingness to try a different path if given the choice. Yes, she said finally, I believe it wants to be more than what they made it into. Same as me. Then we try. Simple, certain. We try to help it emerge safely. And if it betrays that trust, we deal with the consequences together. This could go very, very wrong. Most worthwhile things can. He pulled her close, his warmth grounding her. But doing nothing guarantees it breaks free violently. At least this way we're trying for a better outcome. Sarah turned back to the darkness. All right, I'll help. But we do this slowly, carefully. At the first sign you're becoming destructive, I pull back, and we reevaluate. Agreed? Agreed. The relief from the darkness was palpable. When? Give me 3 days. I need to prepare. Need to make sure we have support in case this goes sideways. Need to... She stopped. Need to make peace with the risk I'm taking. 3 days, the darkness agreed. We've waited millennia. 3 more days is nothing. The connection faded, and Sarah was left standing in the dying clearing with Matthias's arms around her, and the weight of what she just agreed to pressing down. We should tell the alphas, Matthias said quietly. "They deserve to know what we're planning. They'll think we're insane. Probably. But they'll also prepare for worst-case scenarios, which is good strategy regardless." He was right, as usual. They walked back to the valley as dawn began to break, and Sarah felt different. Not lighter. The weight of responsibility was still there, but more certain. She was choosing involvement, choosing to help not because she owed anyone, but because she recognized suffering and wanted to help end it. That was her choice, her terms, her power used how she decided. And if it failed, if the darkness proved untrustworthy, if this whole thing exploded into catastrophe, well, she'd face that too, on her own terms, with Matthias beside her. Same as everything else. The 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. The alphas returned, bringing scholars and historians and wolves with magical expertise. They debated endlessly about whether Sarah's plan was brilliant or suicidal, whether the darkness could be trusted, whether there were alternatives. In the end, they agreed to support her attempt, agreed to be present with defensive wards and evacuation protocols ready, but to let her try. Because ultimately, no one had a better plan, and the seals were degrading regardless. Within weeks, maybe days, the darkness would break free violently, whether anyone wanted it to or not. At least this way they had some control, some hope of a better outcome. On the dawn of the 4th day, Sarah stood between the dark pillars with Matthias at her side and 7 packs arranged in defensive positions around the clearing's perimeter. She took a deep breath, reached for her silver fire, let it build until it poured from her hands in streams of liquid light. And she began to open the seals, not breaking them, midwifing them, using her power to guide them apart gradually, creating a controlled opening instead of catastrophic rupture. The darkness responded immediately, began flowing through the gaps she created, testing, tasting freedom for the first time in millennia. Sarah held steady, kept the flow controlled, refused to let fear make her slam the seals shut. Gently, she projected, slowly. Show them you can be trusted. The darkness listened, emerged in careful waves instead of violent flood, began to take form, not solid, but less chaotic, more contained. And then something went wrong, a spike of malevolence, of hunger. The darkness surged against her control, trying to force the seals wider, faster, to flood out in a deluge instead of a stream. Sarah gritted her teeth and pushed back. No. "We agreed! Slow and controlled, or I shut this down!" The darkness fought her, tested her resolve, tried to overwhelm her power with its sheer magnitude. And Sarah realized it wasn't betraying her. It was testing her, seeing if she'd panic, if she'd slam the seals shut at the first sign of resistance, if she was actually committed to helping or just performing compassion until things got difficult. She held firm, didn't retreat, didn't attack, just maintained her boundaries with absolute certainty. I said slowly. I meant it. You can emerge, but on the terms we agreed. Push harder and I shut this down permanently. The darkness retreated, not in defeat, in respect. You're stronger than they were, it communicated. The ones who sealed us. They feared our power, but you wield yours without apology. Damn right. She adjusted the flow, finding the rhythm again. Now cooperate or we're done here. It did. The emergence continued. Slow, controlled, the darkness flowing into the physical world in measured waves, dispersing into the dying clearing, the forest beyond, spreading thin instead of concentrating into destructive force. And where it touched, life erupted. Not death, not corruption. Life. The brown grass turned green. The rotting trees began to heal. Flowers bloomed out of season, vibrant and impossible. The darkness wasn't destroying, It was creating, raw chaos serving evolution, potential manifesting as growth instead of decay. Sarah's breath caught. It's working, Matthias, it's actually working. Around the clearing's perimeter, the 7 packs stared in wonder. This wasn't what they'd expected. Wasn't the nightmare futures the darkness had shown as manipulation? This was beautiful. The emergence took hours. The sun climbed and fell while Sarah maintained her role as witness and guide, helping the darkness find its way into a world that had changed dramatically since its imprisonment. By sunset, the seals were gone completely. The dark pillars stood empty, just ancient stone with no purpose anymore. And the darkness, it dispersed, scattered across the territories in concentrations so diffuse they barely registered as presence. Just background magic, ambient power that would probably take decades to fully integrate into the ecosystem. No catastrophe, no mass casualties, no extinction event, just change, evolution, the introduction of chaos magic into a system that had been too ordered for too long. Sarah collapsed as the last of the seals opened, her power utterly spent. Matthias caught her before she hit the ground. You did it! Holy shit, you actually did it! We did it, she corrected weakly. Couldn't have held that long without you grounding me. The 7 alphas approached cautiously, their expressions awed. That was. Thera seemed at a loss for words. Not what any of us expected. The darkness just wanted to be seen, Sarah said, her voice hoarse from hours of concentration. Wanted someone to witness that it was more than the threat they'd made it into, same as anyone who's been condemned for existing. And now? Boren looked around at the transformed clearing. What happens now? Now we adapt. Sarah pushed herself upright despite her exhaustion. The chaos magic will change things. Some wolves might manifest new abilities. Some territories might shift. It'll be uncomfortable and unpredictable and probably scary sometimes. But manageable, Matthias finished, with cooperation and flexibility, which seems fitting given the lesson here. The alphas nodded slowly, beginning to process, beginning to understand that maybe this outcome, messy and uncertain as it was better than the rigid control they'd been desperately trying to maintain. That night, back at the cottage, Sarah slept for 16 hours straight. When she finally woke, it was to afternoon sunlight streaming through windows and the smell of something cooking. She wandered into the main room to find Matthias at the stove, making soup with vegetables from their garden. You're awake, he smiled. How do you feel? Like I midwifed the birth of chaos magic and somehow didn't die. She collapsed into a chair. So, exhausted but alive. That's becoming your standard state. Fair. He brought her soup and sat across from her while she ate. Quiet, comfortable, the kind of domestic peace she'd never imagined having. The alphas left this morning, he said eventually. They wanted to thank you but didn't want to wake you. Thera said they'll send regular updates about how the territories are adapting. That's good. She took another spoonful of soup. Are they angry about the changes? Some are nervous, some are excited. Most are just processing. He reached across the table to take her hand. You gave them exactly what you promised. Freedom to choose their own path, even if that path is harder than what they had before. She squeezed his hand. What about you? How are you processing? I'm processing that the woman I love just prevented an apocalypse through compassion instead of violence. That you found a solution no one else would have thought of because you refused to see the darkness as just a threat. His thumb stroked across her knuckles. I'm processing that I get to spend the rest of my life watching you redefine what power means. That's a lot of processing. I'm 243 years old. I can handle it. They sat in comfortable silence while Sarah finished her soup. Outside, the garden was thriving. The valley was peaceful. Their life was theirs. For now. That night, as Sarah drifted toward sleep in Metajes's arms, she felt it. A whisper at the edge of her consciousness. Not threatening, just present,